So tonight is Tuesday, May 11th, 2021, and it is a little past 6:30. Good evening, Council. We'll start at the top. Meeting accessibility. Pursuant to the Governor's Emergency Proclamation 20-25, the City is unable to provide an in-person location for the public to listen to the virtual City Council meeting this evening. Meetings are still accessible to the public, and public comment is able to be submitted. To view live, City website, www.sammamish.us/TV21. City YouTube is https://www.youtube.com, and Comcast Channel 21 within Sammamish only. To view later, the meeting videos are available the day after the meeting. Again, the city website is www.sammamish.us/TV21. The YouTube, www.youtube.com/channel/ and then a long string of things. And Comcast Channel 21 within Sammamish only. The first thing we have got an executive session, and that is going to be regarding potential litigation pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101I. And I think we'll be adding this stuff to the second one. So it is going to be solely on that topic. And with that, how much time do you think we will need? Okay, so we will need 15 minutes, and with that, I will see council on the other side. Okay, so we're going to reintroduce this as the 2022 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Plan, and this is from Jeff and from Doug. Okay, Jeff, I'll let you finish off where you were.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Yes, it's staff's duty tonight to present to the council our draft transportation improvement plan for 2022-2027. Our goal is to attempt to fit within a reasonable set of revenue assumptions a series of projects for the next year that we believe meets the intent going forward. Doug, next slide. So as background and as a reminder, all cities in Washington are required to adopt a 6-year TIP pursuant to RCW 35-77-010. Typically, the TIP is adopted annually. It usually precedes the CIP and budgetary decisions that are made later in the year. The TIP can be amended and changed at any time upon request. However, it does require a public hearing. The TIP is required to be consistent with the comp plan. It is a planning level document and does not establish expense authority, nor revenue authority for that matter, but we will attempt to balance those two from a planning level standpoint. And typically, a TIP is required for most grant funding eligibility requirements. Next slide. So what we're about to present to you is an overview of our revenue assumptions to date. They're fluid and can be moved and modified, of course. We want to go and give you an overview of projects that fit within those revenue assumptions. We'd like to talk about next steps and see if we've missed anything that we need to prepare ahead of the June 1st public hearing. Next slide. So this is the beginning of attempting to balance our expenses to revenue. The first focus that we have here is on the right-hand side, you'll see columns that say reasonably anticipated project revenue sources. Those right now add up to approximately $47 million, give or take. And we'll be diving into each one of those separately here in a moment. And then after we talk about or show you the revenue pieces individually, we'll move over to the left side and talk about the projects that fit those revenue sources. Next slide. So the first one is general fund, ending fund balance. At the moment, we're not assuming dollars from that source into the 6-year TIP. It can obviously be added at council discretion, but consistent with the budget that we had this last go around and how tight things are with COVID and all, we have not made any assumptions here at this time. Next slide, please. Traffic impact fees. A report was sent to council from the finance department for 2020 outlining where we were with expenditures to date. And so what we have here is our forecast of what traffic impact fees might look like for the 6-year window. We made an assumption based on the draft regional growth targets of 885 new trips coming into the system, generating approximately $4.2 million. And again, based on the report that was prepared by finance, there's roughly, as of May 3rd, $6.4 million that are restricted to traffic impact fees. We do have an amount of traffic impact fees totaling, well, by 2023, we need to spend $326,000 in round numbers of traffic impact fees towards eligible projects. And by 2024, another $1.3 million in traffic impact fees because they're coming up on their 10-year window. Next slide. Real estate excise tax, we're keeping this flat for the entire 6-year period. We're assuming $3 million annually for a total of $18 million in the 6-year window. Next slide. As we're all aware and thankful, we have received a state appropriation towards our Lewis Thompson Road project. We have put it in the transportation side at this time because it is a roadway project as well as a storm project that we have been earmarked to receive $3 million towards that project. Next slide. We are pursuing grants. We are looking to go after King County flood reduction grants on a couple of projects during the 6-year window, and we think that the projects listed here have a very good chance of receiving some design monies towards those projects listed herein. Next slide. We have talked with Transportation Improvement Board, and based on our conversations that we had just a couple weeks back, there's a possibility that the projects listed herein could have could score well in the 6-year window and be competitive towards receiving grant funding from the Transportation Improvement Board. So we've identified roughly $5 million of potential grant funding from this source towards the 3 projects listed here. Next slide, please. We think it's possible to receive a federal grant, probably earmarked towards the Issaquah Pine Lake Road project. It's the project furthest along in the mix of eligible projects. And we think it's reasonable that in a 6-year window, a federal grant towards that project is possible. Next slide, please. And lastly, in our revenue assumptions, our stormwater utility fees need to be reviewed and contemplated for adjustment in the next 6-year window. The 3 projects listed here would be eligible projects for their proportionate share of stormwater contribution towards those 3 projects. In your packet, we had said $7 million due to refinements and ongoing adjustments that we're making to this plan. We now have adjusted that downwards to about $5.7 million. Next slide. So the total of that adds up to almost $47 million for the 6-year window of what we think are reasonable revenue assumptions during that 6-year time period. So the next part of this, we want to switch over and talk about the expense side of the equation and what projects are likely to fit and where we have developed a recommendation, if you will, and as to why, and we'll get into that here. We've identified kind of 6 categories of projects. We have future concurrency growth projects, which are really tied to the EIS, and until that gets resolved, we are not putting any projects into that category at this time. We have intersection and safety, as well as ITS projects related to our signal system. That's a whole grouping unto itself. We have a 3rd grouping of corridor safety and system completion projects. We'll break each one of those out and show you what's in each one of these. We have the programmatic section. These are sidewalks, ADA, and a couple other groups that we'll show you. And then the last two groups are regionally significant projects, of which others, such as WashDOT, King County, are likely to be the ones paying for those, but they have a significant impact to our transportation network. And then there's a partial list of long-range system completion projects in the bottom. So next slide, please. So the first group we've already talked about. These are, I have not identified any projects. We're waiting to see the outcome of the EIS. That'll happen later this year, and subject to the final review and adoption of the EIS, a project list will be developed, and a new TIP will be also developed and brought before the council and the community at a later date. Next slide. Some of the intersection safety improvement projects are listed here. They have a total estimated value of approximately $6.6 million. A couple of these start off with some studies. There's going to, would need further dollars to move the project forward. In the far right-hand column, you can see a column that says future. As we go left to right, there's an overall project cost here. Prior costs, if I've been able to identify those, and we have the 6-year cost, and then a forecast if the project isn't completed in the 6-year window, how much money would be needed in the future for each one of these. Next slide. Corridor safety projects, this is where the kind of the biggest bulk of the projects are. And what we're recommending as a go-forward project, probably in mostly its entirety, is Issaquah Pine Lake Road, Phase 1. The reason for that is that 50% of the project expenses are traffic impact fee eligible, and given that we have a need to spend those dollars, given the 10-year horizon that's coming upon us, we want to continue design, continue right-of-way, and then seek the rest of the dollars in the 6-year window with the intent of hopefully finishing the project as early as 2027. We have also identified Lewis-Thompson Road that we just talked about earlier, getting state grants or state appropriation, and we want to pursue other grant funding for that project. We also show 212th as a project. This is going across Ebright Creek Swamp there that needs a major improvement. Here, starting just showing the beginnings of that project from a design standpoint and moving that project forward, but obviously not finishing it in the 6-year window as shown here. And then we do need to come back and talk with council. Just to let you know, on June 8th, we tentatively have scheduled to bring back before the city council Issaquah Fall City Road Phase 2 and Issaquah Pine Lake Road Phase 1, both of those projects for update and review by council in a much greater detail. But we're looking at here, given the huge flooding that happened a few years back, potentially breaking the project out on Issaquah Fall City Road and between Endeavor Elementary and Southeast Doofy Hill Road as a separate project, potentially seeking revenue sources for that and trying to advance that project forward as possibly a standalone project. Next slide. On the programmatic side, we have consolidated the programmatic expenses, if you will, down into these 4 groups. One is the ADA barrier removal. Council has adopted budget dollars towards this in our current budget, as well as a commitment going forward. The dollars shown here appear to be reasonable from staff's perspective within the 6-year window. Then there are safety improvements, intersection projects. That's kind of a placeholder. These are the kinds of things where we partner with the schools or neighborhoods for intersection crossing improvements as a possibility. TR-B is our non-motorized. This is where sidewalk improvement projects, gap projects would reside. And then lastly, we do think it's important to bring forward our pavement preservation, street reconstruction. We've identified in our pavement management system several projects that are not maintenance, they're really reconstruction due to the terrible aging that's occurred on them and the inability to have those streets paved in a timely fashion, so to speak. And so they've degraded in a way that some require full reconstruction or at least full asphalt removal and rebuild. And so there's a category there that we put into the programmatic. Next slide. On the regional projects, our legislative priorities are included here. In Redmond, the East Lake Sammamish Parkway and SR 202 intersection improvement. We still have SR 202 and Sahalee Way intersection shown here. And then we have several other projects that are in the county or the city or being sponsored by others such as Sound Transit's North Sammamish Park and Ride Lot. And this is a regional bucket of projects that we believe would be paid by others, but they would be in our TIP, showing support and the ability to help pursue grants with partner agencies.
Hey, Jeff.
Next slide.
You there?
Yes.
Because go back to that last chart. There was a lot cut off at the bottom I could not see.
When you say a lot on your screen, what do you see? Sorry?
Okay.
You're talking about the regional projects? Is that correct?
I think Councilmember Odell may have zoomed in on his screen.
Yeah, I did.
I don't think it's you, Jeff.
Okay. Am I able to move forward or?
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Next slide, Doug. And the last group of lists, and there could be a lot of different projects on here from the unadopted transportation master plan, but some of the key projects that we've identified here are ones that we're familiar with, but will be likely tied to the EIS. And ones that come to mind are the Sahalee Way corridor type projects that are listed here. There's just not enough money to do all of the projects, but these may likely be the next ones in line from staff's perspective. And so we have created a partial list of long-range system completion projects shown in this group. Next slide. So with that, the expenses have been defined as being in the neighborhood of $46 million. They do balance to the revenue side. The next part of this presentation is to show how far the dollars go if we don't like those revenue assumptions and we pull back on a couple to see how far we get. And so with that, next slide, Doug. So when we talked about the revenue sources, there were several of them, but the ones that we know we definitely have money for with high probability in the next 6 years is obviously the potential for general fund. No dollars shown at this time, but that is a high probability if the council chooses to do it. We have traffic impact fees we've already talked about and forecasted, real estate excise tax, as well as the capital funds. In doing so, it shows a shortage on this slide of roughly almost $15 million. And that gets us through the fourth year of the 6-year transportation plan. So if these are the only revenue sources that we reasonably expect in the next 6 years, then it only gets us through year 4 of the plan. We can come back and talk about that as well. Doug, next slide. If we add on a good probability that we'll receive a few grants, possibly from King County flood reduction as well as the TIB, then our gap is only about $8.7 million. And what's really missing, the other two sources not shown here then, would be a federal grant as well as adjustments to the stormwater utility. But this gives us an opportunity to show in dialogue, if we choose, where the shortages would be in the event that we don't reasonably assume that we get a federal grant and or adjustments to the utility in the 6-year window. Next slide. So bringing those all together, we show a balance of projects to the tune of $46 million, both on the expense side as well as reasonably anticipated project revenue sources, at least at this point in time from staff's perspective. Next slide. So this is a map showing where the key projects are. They're color-coded to reflect the intersection safety projects as a group, the corridor safety projects as another group. Those regional projects, at least a few of them, are listed here as well. We did not show the long-range projects on this list, but these are the ones that are, have the best chance of going forward in staff's perspective. Next slide. So we're nearing the end of our presentation. We are targeting June 1st. We have done notification for that regular business meeting to hold the TIP hearing, and we keep it open, presumably. And then on June 15th, subject to what we hear on June 1st, June 15th would be the adoption. Next slide. So next steps, we want to hear from council on what we have put forth. We can bounce back and forth with the slides as you have questions. We do have the need and opportunity to continue reviewing some of the other grant sources as well. But then we would, depending upon what we hear tonight, we're going to queue up to go forward with the hearing on June and hopefully adoption so that we can submit this to the state, ideally by July 1st. Last slide, or next slide. So with that, Mayor, we turn it back over to you. And like I said, we can bounce back to any number of slides. I know there's a lot of information there, but back to you.
Excellent. Well, I think everybody just about has questions. So we are going to start with Councilmember Stewart.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. That was a lot of information, and really appreciate you and staff pulling all that together. I know that this is always a heavy lift, and really do appreciate all that work. I do have a pretty long list of questions. My first question is, in the revised version of this memo, you provide that traffic impact fees would be about $10 million. What are the assumptions that go into that $10 million?
Doug, could we go back to that slide in the beginning?
Like how many and what types of houses per year would give us $10 million?
Sure. So if you look here on this slide, I know we went through it relatively fast. We took a calculation of the 885 trips, and I looked at it between now and 2035 versus, so that's 14 years. And if we said, well, what if it were 21 years that lasted? The average is about 50 trips per year. And so assuming that 50 trips per year at our current impact fee rate, that would generate $4.2 million. We already have 6.4 in the bank, and that gets us up to roughly 10.7 million, as shown on this slide.
I'm sorry, I got a little lost because we collect our impact fees based on housing units built. So I'm not sure I understand the math with trips.
When we do our concurrency is associated with trips, and we have a dollar value per trip.
Right, but we collect impact fees based on units built, not based on trips. I mean, I know there's math around those trips, but our impact fees aren't on a per trip basis.
Right. The assumption I've made here is one housing unit equals one trip, and therefore it works out to the number shown here.
So you're assuming 885 houses per year?
No, I'm assuming 50 on average, 50 per year for the next 6 years.
Okay, which gives us $4 million. Is that correct?
That's correct, 4.2 million.
And okay, and then we have $6 million that are currently available.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you. So 50, okay. All right, cool. That's great. And we're assuming they're all single-family homes.
For purposes of this exercise, yes.
Okay. One question is, on the August 5th, 2020 CIP, our traffic impact fees were, oh, I see, that's the $4 million. Okay, now I'm following. Okay, great, because that doesn't include the balance that's available. Okay. The stormwater fee that you show of $7 million in revenue, I know like Thompson Hill is part road, part stormwater. But that $7 million, how does that factor into the transportation, planning?
Right. So with Lewis Thompson Road being, we're assuming the full meal deal is the project, which is the entire corridor, doing both a tight line project and doing a sidewalk improvement where the tight line essentially goes underneath that. And so therefore, I'm assuming it's a transportation project from that perspective, from a TIP. And therefore, there would be stormwater associated with it to make up the balance needed to complete the project.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful. I know you went through this. It just went a little bit fast for me, so I appreciate that.
And Pam, one other clarity. In our hand, or in the packet, we had $7 million identified, but due to refinements just this week, we dropped that down to 5.7.
Got it.
Just
okay, that makes
give
sense.
That clarity.
Thanks. You do make a comment in the agenda bill that you say that that there are no capacity projects, and you have a category of projects called future concurrency and growth. And I was just wondering if you could clarify, like, what is a growth project and what is a future concurrency project versus a capacity project?
Yeah, Doug, you want to go to that slide that has that on the expense side? So what we're saying here is that there are potentially a bundle of projects that will come out as a result, or will be identified as a result of the EIS that's currently under study. By the way, staff will be coming back to council, I believe, on the 18th with a presentation regarding the schedule change related to this. But that being said, what we're assuming here is well, we don't know what's coming out of the EIS yet. And so the growth and capacity projects for future concurrency are tied to the V/C analysis that's occurring in the EIS. And once that gets done, we believe that there will projects that will fit into this grouping.
Okay, so we're not going to, so on roadways, so that's for future. So that means that if we have any intersections with current failures, those are included. Is that correct in the planning?
When we go to the next grouping, Doug, can you show the next grouping, please? These are the groupings that related to intersection and or ITS projects that we believe fit within the revenue assumptions that we've identified here.
Okay, but my question is specifically, so we have intersections that are currently failing concurrency. Are we addressing those on this list, all of those failures on this list?
No, we are not.
So how long do we have, if we have an existing failure, how long do we have as a city to create a plan for and fix an existing failure? Like, it feels like we can't just leave it out there for all of eternity and not address it.
Right. I believe what will happen when the EIS is completed, it will reevaluate all of the concurrency failures that are out there in the system, and we will come back and redo the TIP to meet the adoption of whatever comes out of the EIS. So, you know, we're doing a limited version to fit within dollars that we have available. We're waiting for the outcome of the EIS, which is all the deficiencies that will be redefined, reprioritized, and anticipate that a new TIP will follow that sometime early next year, or this time next year, probably. Okay.
And then you also, there were a lot of other potential revenue sources in the original memo. And I'm just curious why those were all taken off the table for discussion.
They are still on the table for discussion if the council chooses them. It was staff's recommendation, if you will, to narrow the focus to fit within what we currently have available and give a more reasonable, limited approach at this time. It's not, there are, you know, bonds and taxes and all those other tools that are available to the council. And if the council chooses to want to add more projects or have a different funding mix, we'd be happy to have that dialogue. But not knowing which ones, why, and when, and not knowing the outcome of the EIS, we thought we'd be conservative and provide a limited recommended project list that matches a reasonable set of assumptions for revenue at this time.
Okay, great. The REIT that you assume, is that still the half that goes to transportation, or does that assume that you have taken the any REIT from parks? The $3 million annually.
Anjali won't let me take her share, so.
Good for her. Good. I'm
we
glad
have a partnership.
to hear that. Okay.
I know I jest, but this is the same 50% number going forward at this time.
Awesome. I love that. One last I think it's my last question here. So on the map that you showed, I love the map. I like pictures. You show at the top of that the East Lake Sammamish Parkway and 202 project as part of the regional project, but that's actually not included in your list of projects with any funding. Isn't that correct?
Doug, can you show the list of the regional projects? Thanks for bouncing back.
Like I thought they were all future projects. None of them had any funding for today.
Right.
For the next 6 years.
So for the next 6 years, we don't know what we're going to get, when we're going to get it. And so with some assumptions on my part, I put it all into the future list, not knowing for sure when. And then secondarily, these are funded by others and not by the city. But we would like them on the list so that we can show partnership. I just didn't know when to put the dollars there, and then it would have to go into its own bucket called by others, which is fine. But for now, I just put it all in the future list.
Okay. Are all the other, so if we go, I'm sorry, Doug, can we go back to the map? Poor Doug. He's doing a great job. Thank you, Doug. So this map shows not just ones that you're proposing that we approve on the tip with funding, but also ones that have no potential timeline or funding at all as well? Or is it just the regional ones that are in that?
We did not, what's missing, if you will, we did not put any of the partial, the last list. Doug, what's the last list? Help me out, I'm tongue-tied.
It's the long range.
Oh yeah, the long range partial list. We did not map any of those projects on this map. We would show those probably as not being funded, but still on the list, but not. We didn't create a map of it at this time. We can. That's great input if the council wants to see it that way.
Well, I'd kind of like to see a map that just shows here's what we're proposing is on the tip with funding in the next 6 years. Like these regional projects, I feel like it's a little, I don't mean that you intentionally misled, it just feels a little misleading because it's not funding from us. We have no idea if anybody is funding it, if anybody's planning on doing it or anything. And by showing it on here, it makes it feel like we're potentially going to work on it. But I don't think that's true, right?
Well, we don't have funding clearly identified in the next 6 years at this point in time. Those regional done by other, the simple thing, we could take them off of this map or we could leave them because somebody else might like seeing those. And then we could add in, the long-range list as well. So feedback from the council is important for us to understand what maps do you like to see. So
maybe two, like from my perspective, maybe two. One that says, here's what we're proposing with, our funding that we have control over. And then you can have one that kind of shows other future things as well. But I love the pictorial because I think that this is all these other projects, aside from the pink ones, are all ones that you have on the list that you're saying, here's what we believe we can do in the next 6 years, correct?
Given these revenue assumptions, correct.
Yeah, okay. All right, so if we just ignore the pink ones, that's what this map represents. So it's correct. All work in the south except for TR 55.
It's that which is shown here at the moment, correct. Okay.
All right, I think I do have one last one, sorry. I know this has come up many times before, but as we look at intersection improvements, can we take a look at, for some of our busiest intersections, what it would be like, what it would cost for for pedestrian bridges. Like when I think about the intersection at Eastlake, for example, Eastlake High School, that intersection, because we have a lot of kids there from a safety perspective, when somebody hits the walk button, we shut down traffic in all four directions so that people can safely cross because we prioritize safety, and I think that's great. But in doing so, we can create a lot of traffic problems. And so looking at, one or two pedestrian bridges at that intersection could significantly improve both safety and traffic flow. So is that something that you guys have looked at and looked into?
Since I've been here, we have not looked into pedestrian bridges. Doug, does that ring a bell since you've been here?
Yeah, it does actually. Thank you, Councilmember Stewart, for the question. We did look into that for the North Sammamish Park and Ride. That was a question that came up a while back when we first started talking to council about that project. And ultimately what was determined at that time was even though it does provide a safe crossing, or I guess the prevailing sentiment was that people would still cross at the street level and that it would create this, it wouldn't necessarily solve the safety issue. We can certainly look into it.
And why do we think that? Why do we think that people wouldn't use the pedestrian bridge?
Yeah, and that was kind of a circumstantial thing. We were looking at if there was people that got off the bus, would they all go up the stairs and go over the street? It was sort of an open question, but we didn't spend a huge amount of time researching it, but that was sort of where we landed at that time.
All right, just a proposal. I would think there are two locations that come to mind for me. One is the Eastlake High School intersection, and the other one is down by Pine Lake Middle School, where there's a crosswalk not at the intersection, but just south of the intersection that tends to be a little bit challenging in the mornings when all the middle school kids from those neighborhoods are crossing there. It can create a lot of challenges at the intersection. So those would be two locations that I think it would be very interesting to look into because I do think it would improve both safety as well as traffic flow. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And Councilmember Stewart, real quick, before you go, I wanted to clarify one thing. Can you restate your question about the intersection failures? I just want to make sure I understand the question. Because I think so my question is, we have existing intersection failures for concurrency, and some of them have been there for a while. And we have, at this point, no plan anywhere that says we're going to address those. And my question is, how long do we as a city have to create a plan and address existing concurrency failures? Okay, so thank you for the question. I just want to add to what Jeff had said. So we do have existing failures that are addressed in this tip. So 228th and Southeast 40th is an existing failure. 244th and 32nd is an existing failure. East Lake Sammamish Parkway and Southeast 24th are existing failures. These are for the intersection-based concurrency model.
Okay. So are there any other intersection failures that are not on the list?
Not in the 6-year pipeline.
No, I mean, are there any other existing ones in the? Are there any other intersection failures other than those three that exist today?
No.
No. So if we did these, we would address all of the existing concurrency failures.
Using the intersection concurrency, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next on the list is Deputy Mayor.
Great, thank you. Jeff, I have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to bounce back to the slides or not. And I apologize because we didn't get this in advance. I was kind of squinting to look at my screen to see what the numbers were there. It was really hard. Yeah, no, it's okay. It's kind of hard to follow along. So I might ask a question that is actually in the slides you presented. I just couldn't see it.
Sure. That's fair. That's fair.
Okay. So you said reasonably anticipated for funds, and I think this predates your time with the city, but previous council direction has been that we don't like to use funds that are not under our control, so namely the grant funding. I'm just curious if are you using the $8.8 million in grants that was in our packet as part of the assumption on revenues to pay for these projects?
Yeah, yes. Doug, can you go up to one of the revenue sheets that shows all? There we go. So we are assuming that in the 6-year window, a good or likely possibility of receiving King County flood grants, potentially TIB grants, and a PSRC grant.
Okay, so I guess just from a feedback standpoint, my recommendation would be to remove that funding because I don't know that we're going to have it, and what I don't want to do is plan a TIP around funds that we don't necessarily control, because if we don't get those grants, then we're short on funds, and then we aren't actually doing the projects that we have put on our transportation improvement plan. So I know, again, predating your time, the council really honed in on the verbiage surrounding planning document for the TIP, and I know it's a planning document. I know it doesn't spend the funds that are identified on here, but I think from a transparency standpoint, you know, I can't speak for the other council members, but you know, at least the past councils have preferred to have known sources of funding so that we put those towards projects that we know we are going to do. So that way our TIP is not only a planning document, but a living, breathing list of, you know, the projects that we're actually going to embark on, because, you know, through years and years of TIPs in Sammamish, we park projects on there that just don't ever get done. And Issaquah Pine Lake Road is a prime example. This might be year 14, maybe 15, that it's been sitting on our 6-year TIP and hasn't been started. I know we're doing some initial planning work, but I think from my perspective, I prefer the TIP to be a document that is actually a roadmap of what we're going to do. And part of that hangs in the balance with revenue, of course. So I think there's a place for the anticipated grants or, you know, hopeful grants that we'll get, but I don't want to hang our hat on money that we don't have control over for planning out our projects. And then I'm looking down at my notes here.
With that, can we go to, Doug, the slide that has just the high probability bucket near the end so that she can see that, or the group can see it? So if I heard you correctly, and again, not assuming that we're making adjustments to the storm either, because that's not money in hand, these would be the 4 categories that we have on the screen here, if I understand you correctly.
Sorry, let me zoom in on it because I'm struggling.
Okay, so I'll read them to you.
Okay.
In the high probability group, we've assumed no money right now, but the general fund has ending fund balance, has dollars available. We do not assume any. We have traffic impact fees that we are targeting towards a couple of projects in this scenario. We have the REIT and we have the known state appropriation. Those add up to approximately almost $32 million. And what it would do is we would have to adjust the TIP, which is fine if the council wants to do that, but we would adjust the TIP to balance to this roughly $32 million, if that's the view and what the council wants to do. I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm just saying that's where we would need to go, right? So.
Yeah, that or to the general fund, but of course we can't, you know, we need to understand what the implications are of taking money from the general fund, because then obviously we're depleting funds for other things when we do that too. It's just, you know, it's just one suggestion based on, you know, kind of past discussions that we've had. I do have another question. You had TRB up there as non-motorized projects, and that's the sidewalk gaps.
Oh yeah.
You could see the numbers there. I think you had 750,000 in each
annually
one of those years. I gotta scroll out. I can't. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so I'm just curious if we've identified particular projects. I know we traditionally just park, equal dollars across the board. Have we looked at that? Because I know there are projects out there in the city which have kind of been waiting for those sidewalk gap projects to be initiated, and we put those on hold for a little bit. And I know Southeast 24th, there's a hill right across from Beaver Lake Park that is in dire need of a sidewalk. Out off of Issaquah Pine Lake Road, and I think it's 47th, which borders Issaquah and Sammamish on one side, is in dire need of a gap. And of course, if we're going to do Issaquah Pine Lake Road, there's a bus stop out there. King County Metro, it's like not conducive for people to walk down the street to the bus stop without sidewalks. So I'm just curious if we've identified particular projects associated, or we haven't gotten that granular.
We have not got that granular, and it's one of the reasons on this slide that for the year 2022, I don't show any sidewalks, because we're still trying to figure out all of those and which ones would be a priority. We'd love to bring those back. We just haven't had the bandwidth to get that granular just yet. But our intention is to do so. Okay. And then early on in your presentation, you talked about expiring traffic impact fees. And I know you said there's a 10-year window, but my understanding is that actually can be stretched further than 10 years. And I'll be honest with you, I don't recall the details relative to it. So I'm curious how, I think you said the first 326,000 is expiring in 2023, and there's another $1.5 million. I didn't get the year down. 2024. What's the reality of that? I think if you have those fees associated with a project on your tip, can't you stretch it out further than 10 years?
That I would circle back with legal to be sure.
Okay. We'll get that technical question answered to be sure. What I've been told to date is the 10-year window is real, and we were planning accordingly, but we will circle back.
Okay. Well, it doesn't sound like we're at any risk of not spending those, but I know it depends on when they come in as to when they have to be spent. So, and
the council did receive a report from the finance department. They're online if we want them to answer detailed questions, or we could even bring up a slide to show those dollars that were in the report that finance sent to council here, I believe it was last week, the week before. So, well,
I guess the more important detail is we're not at any risk of not spending those, though, based on this tip. Is that a fair assessment?
Assuming that we go forward with Issaquah Pine Lake Road to design and right-of-way, the answer would be yes. If that's a fair assumption, and that's what we've assumed here in this plan, that project is going forward, then I don't see those at risk. If that changes, then that changes. Then we have to look at something else.
Okay. And then what may be unpopular with at least one of my fellow council members is the discussion of the REIT and how we split it. And I know this council has had that discussion before. I think, it's a council level decision as to how we divide that REIT, which right now is divided in half. But if we come up with a funding shortfall because some of those grants don't come in, that is an option for us to exercise should we choose to, and we cannot figure out another way to make ends meet. So I'm not trying to rob Anjali of funding at all, but I think when looking at this and any shortfalls we might have, all options need to be on the table.
As long as you do it and I don't, then I think she'll be okay with me. So that's up to you.
Fair enough. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next, we have Councilmember Odell.
Thank you. I'm going to take this thing off so you can actually hear me. I have a request to make. I wish I'd seen these charts Friday night instead of just now. I think it's only fair to the council that we see stuff at least 48 hours ahead of time, because I would have liked to have gone over these charts slowly rather than having to try to do it on the fly. One of my favorite pet peeves. So just as a record for the future, please don't do this to me again. I won't be happy. Overall comment is this discussion kind of puts some of the other discussions we've had about potential use of funds in perspective. $10 million for Inglewood Middle School baseball field comes to mind. Overall,
Doug, can you go back to the summary sheet?
beg your pardon?
I was going to have Doug bring up the slide that had the summary on it.
Okay.
Is this one, Jeff?
I agree with the Deputy Mayor. This is heavily oriented toward the south. With respect to the stuff that is shown in the north, that is actually mostly regional. It's Sound Transit, or it's working with WashDOT and Redmond and King County to solve problems that are not within our boundaries. One other thing I noted is the pavement management fund is zeroed out. I think that's a big mistake, and I think it's being unrealistic. The last time I was on this council, we had a long discussion about being ahead of the game on keeping pavement healthy as a much cheaper in the long run thing to do. Yes, in the short run, you can raid the piggy bank, but eventually you're going to pay the price for it. And there was already talk tonight about having to dig up certain roads and go down to the aggregate level and start over again. That will prevent that, or at least delay that happening.
Can I comment on that one, Tom?
Please.
Regarding the pavement, in the last budget cycle, there was discussion that routine overlays, which we have funded to date, would be in the operating side of the equation. And if we're doing reconstruction or rebuild, that would be treated as a capital project and would come into the basically Fund 340. So it isn't that we're stopping the paving program. It's most of the paving program is on the operating side of the equation and not shown in the TIP because it's considered operations and maintenance. Does that help?
It does, but for the casual reader, it would be nice to footnote that.
Okay.
Issaquah is building a new campus on the south end of the city, which will impact us on 228th. I didn't see anything in here about that, or did I miss it, Jeff?
It is a, what do you call it, on the future list. At the moment, we have, where's it at there? Wait a minute, it's on the intersection.
Southeast 40th, 228.
Yes. Southeast 40th, 228. TR54 is the project that's listed there, which is at the intersection just north of the new high school going into.
Well, based on the discussion we had a couple of weeks ago, that $972,000 is not going to be anywhere near enough.
And that's the difference between doing just an intersection versus the entire corridor. You're absolutely correct.
And we'll have to fix the corridor before 2027.
I can support that. I can support that.
All right. Lastly, TR53 has disappeared from this list, which is basically Northeast 28th and Sahali Way. It's in there for $1.3 million for an intersection improvement, which is not on this list. And trust me, we need it. It's a major bus stop, major crossing between two neighborhoods, and between 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the evening, it's worth your life to get across it. The same thing during rush hour in the morning. We've had traffic backed up all the way from Timberline down to the fire station at times during pre-COVID times. So we need an intersection improvement there to include a stoplight and a crossing. My 2 bits on that. Okay.
If I can go ahead and add just a quick note to that, if you're okay. Thank you, Councilmember Rodell. This is Doug McIntyre. So the Sahali intersections have not shown up on this because it relates to the Sahali corridor. So due to the EIS work that's being done, we anticipate that will be something that's addressed in the EIS. And to Jeff's point earlier in the presentation, we have not prejudiced any of the outcomes of the EIS, so we're taking those corridor projects out, including their intersection.
Okay, Doug, I hear you, but I also know of the need for that intersection.
Yes, absolutely. You're right.
Councilman, we'll take note. We'll take note of it, but the approach of the attorneys has been to strictly not prejudice where we go with it. So we will take note, but we don't want to predetermine any outcomes. Thank you.
I don't find that comforting, Dave. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, well, I'm on, I think, almost all the same bandwagon that Councilmember Odell was on. The bus stop on that north end, I agree completely on. I understand that we are still waiting for the EIS. But, you know, I thought we were going to be done with the EIS in fall, and here it is now spring. I have this terrible feeling that we're going to be told we're going to be waiting again until fall, and could be later or something. But I just want it noted that I'm really hoping by fall that we've got to make something safe for that route. We have to put something there. So we have to put something into the budget. Maybe it's not tonight, but please put a big star there. Then I also want to go back because I don't like to see that. I do want to mention, I think it was Councilmember Stewart that actually mentioned the lack of projects on the north end. Because it's, again, we're way south end heavy on projects. And, you know, that has been that way probably for 20 years. That's continuing to be a problem. And it's little by little, nickel and dimed. And we probably could have fit in Sahali by this point in time. We're just, you know what, we're going to have to bite the bullet and eventually put in a project up there. And so I'm getting frustrated. And so the other one is, we didn't necessarily say anything about a $10 million baseball stadium at Inglewood Junior High. Got to correct that one. And, but I also, the other comment I had is my concern for that South End Issaquah school site. And that one is one that was also mentioned by Mr. Councilmember Odell. I have got that in my notes, and I don't think we have enough money there. I do think that's a problem depending on what the school district is going to do. I would propose that they stay on the main routes, but if that's going to be the case, then that's going to take money. And I would hope that that would be the suggestion the city is going to suggest. But that's going to take more money than that, would be what I think. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth on that. Okay, next up, I see Councilmember Gamblin.
We're on speaker. Here we go. Okay. So a couple of things. Thank you for putting this together, guys. The numbers really help. The graphs really help. Super appreciate it. Thank you. A couple of things. I agree with the deputy mayor on counting and having in our calculations money that we don't know if we're going to get. I was wondering if we could maybe look at that in a historical manner as some percentage. So, you know, historically we get 1 out of 3 grants or 1 out of 4. And then, you know, we can weight it to that type of percentage. Maybe we should get 25% or 30, whatever. You guys know better historically what we've tended to get, but that may be an option to be more realistic about these funding sources than just to go ahead and drop the full amounts in there. The second question I have is on the ADA. So I remember when we talked about the ADA last year, it practically knocked my head off how much money we were talking about. It was $100 million or $200 million or some crazy amount of money. And what we've now put into our calculations for this seems to be phenomenally tiny as per to the super large amount that we expected to have to spend to comply with this in the next 20 years. So is there any type of realistic amortization that has happened on year 1, 2, 3, where they're all at 450? Again, I would have expected more like 5 million or 10 million to meet the amounts that I remembered would be necessary to be compliant to the ADA regulations. I know we were told we would have a little bit of leeway, but right now we're 6 years out and we're spending almost nothing. I don't know whether whoever decides to sue us over lack of ADA improvements, whether they're going to wait 6 years if we're spending almost nothing on that. So I wonder if we could at some point have a discussion on, again, on how much we expect that to be, and then how realistic we are being with amortizing those costs by putting $450,000 for the first 3 years. So anyway, Jeff, you don't have to answer that now, but if we could address it, I think it's a big black hole we are not looking at. And then just third point is, it seems just from this discussion tonight that expenses are way underrepresented and revenue is overrepresented. So hopefully as we go along, we adjust our spreadsheets accordingly. It seems to me, having looked at this for years and now looking at from the dais, that the city has, it's almost a joke how little money has been put aside for these enormous infrastructure repairs that we knew would occur as we built out the city and added more and more population and more travel, more trips. We don't have any money basically put aside for this as compared to realistically what it's going to cost to fix it. So we need to have a more serious discussion on where it's going to come from. It doesn't look like it's coming from revenue sources. The cars are coming, more houses are coming, more trips are coming. So where's the money coming to put this infrastructure to the point where our residents are not sitting in unacceptable amounts of traffic? So again, you don't have to answer that now, Jeff, but it's something to be looking at as we go forward. That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, next I have Councilmember Train.
So so the first idea, Jeff, here, I think, is that you're bringing forward is that the tip that you're presenting here with the assumptions is to meet the state requirement. So, and meaning we as a council have to approve a tip. So so are we preparing, is this your attempt? Is this the attempt to prepare a tip that will meet, put the city in compliance? You're on mute.
Yeah, Doug, can you move to the slide that shows both the revenue buckets and the summary of project costs? It's like the last one. Keep going. Yeah, one of those. There you go. Yep, go back. Okay, so this is what staff is proposing at the moment, notwithstanding what council wants to do collectively, whether we're going to take out the grants and those assumptions or not. If we choose to do that, we're proposing to show a balance between reasonable revenue assumptions and then once I know what those revenue assumptions are, then what projects can fit in there within the window or at least to get started.
So this TIP reflects what we could pay for at this time and then, in a sense, moving forward for the next 6 years, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That's our goal. That's what we're trying to convey to you.
Thank you.
Yep.
So then after we get the EIS report back, then is the council's responsibility to adopt a new TIP that would reflect what we need to build and then make decisions on how to fund them. Do I understand that correctly?
That's correct.
And then Doug, I believe, and yourself have stated in some of the answers to my fellow council members that in the long-range plans, there are projects in there that would, or future, I think you call them future concurrency and growth plans, projects, excuse me, growth projects, that then some of those projects would possibly meet what we're going to get reported back on the EIS. And specifically concurrency, right? We're going to meet the failing intersections.
Correct.
Am I understand? Okay, I'm good, right? We're good?
Yes, the outcome of the EIS will give us a project list, assuming it's approved, of the concurrency needs and growth projects as a result of the work done with the EIS.
Okay.
And then we'd circle back with you with a new TIP, and a funding program, to address that.
That's what. Okay, so that leads me to my. So if we keep the plan as you have presented here, are there other? 'Cause I'm not going to be as nice as Councilmember Gamblin because he said you could answer this later. But are there other funding and revenue sources available for us currently for us to pay for the infrastructure needs? Are you aware of any other revenue funding sources or ways that we can raise money, something you've done in some other job?
So I can list a few. We also gave you that information in one of the advanced agendas towards this. But one of them would be I'm getting a real bad echo. One of them would be a traffic impact, transportation benefit district. That's license tap fees and sales tax. And that has we can come back and present to you on that as a program, but that would require analysis and, council review and votes on those kinds of things. That's one new revenue source that we don't have that could generate money towards capital projects for transportation.
And I read that, and I'm glad you brought that up because that was the answer I gave to my own question. So thank you, Jeff. I think bring it forward. We need to look at that. So then the last, thank you. The last would be on the regional projects.
Doug, can you go there?
Help me understand that because, there's been emails that have gone out. You asked a month ago about Puget Sound Region Council wanted us to get something to them by May 7th on regional projects for funding. And then when I look at the city of Sammamish and look at transportation issues, the three projects, well, two for sure that you put on here on 202, I don't see why we would ever take those off of our tip. I just don't understand why. I mean, the other one I think, well, actually, those are the two because that gets us connection to a highway, an interstate. And it's the only, unless you can figure out, Jeff, some way to get us connected to I-90 without, like you're going to do a sky bridge over Issaquah. This has got to stay on our tip. And I would suggest to the council, to fellow council members, that we even look at taking the lead, depending on what we find out from that EIS and the mayor's comment and Councilmember Odell's comment about doing something to work on Holly Way. That's just been, that can's been kicked down the road for how long? We need to work on that intersection at 202 and Holly Way for sure. Which means that the intersection before that, which is the one I drive through every 5 days a week to go to work, is right there in Redmond. So keep pushing. My vote, my advice would be that you need to keep those two on and push them forward. The last one, and this is just a pet peeve of mine, and I don't know, I know council or staff before has pushed on Issaquah for a section of roadway that is Issaquah or Pine Lake. Gee, what is it?
It's TR 27.
Yeah. How do we get
48 to Issaquah Fall City Road.
Yeah, that stretch of 2-lane road that goes, if we do phase 1, it seems to me it doesn't make any sense to do Pine Lake Issaquah or Pine Lake Falls, or is it Issaquah? Yeah, Pine Lake Issaquah Pine Lake Road. If we don't get a hold of that little stretch of road that's in the city limit of Issaquah. So if you, my advice there or ask would be to communicate with Issaquah about if we're going to move forward with that project, phase 1, TR02, if we're going to move forward with that, we need our friends in Issaquah to help us out. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, and so we can finish our first round completely. Councilmember Ross.
Jeff, first of all, I like the way you presented this under existing projections and revenue sources. Presumably the project list.
Doug, can you go to that slide, please?
The projects that you selected, I presume, are what you've determined over previous feedback as high priority and something that are likely to occur. Is that fair?
Correct.
And when we get into the EIS, I'm assuming when the EIS is completed that there is probably some existing projects identified that will remain a priority as it links to the EIS results, correct?
Depending upon the outcome of that study, that's a possibility.
That's a possibility. Or worst case scenarios, EIS could be very additive.
It should add projects as well and find deficiencies, and we will articulate all of those as a result of the outcome of that study. And then bring those, once it gets approved, bring that list back to the TIP and the council, of course, and begin the prioritization and funding of all of those. And those are likely big dollar decisions that aren't reflected here. This is a bare bones approach because we don't know which projects, and we have not dialogued about the global city CIP and all the revenue sources that the council may want to look at. Again, very bare bones.
Okay, so even if we reduce some of the projects to accommodate the EIS results, those reductions won't put a big dent in the potential additional project scope identified by the EIS.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
We're going to need, if I understand your question, we're going to need a lot more money.
Yep, that's what I'm gathering. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go back up to the top of the list for round 2. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you very much. Hey, Jeff, I forgot to ask you last time. You made a comment in your opening presentation talking about how tight things are with COVID these days. Can you clarify that? I wasn't under the impression that COVID had impacted our revenue and that any costs we've incurred due to COVID have all been covered by the CARES Act funding we received.
Yeah, my statement was about the budget being reduced as a result of COVID overall, the adjustments that we had to make in the budgetary process, and so not knowing exactly how COVID has done that, it was a global statement. So
okay.
I don't have the granular information the way that you've asked it.
Okay. Mr. City Manager, were there budget impacts due to COVID? Because I wasn't aware that that was actually the case, and I just want to understand if there's something I've missed.
not in particular that we'd put our finger on that could have been COVID related and or moratorium related.
Moratorium, yeah.
It's as Jeff said, just a global statement.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. Along the same lines as Councilmember Gamblin was asking, I think in terms of grant funding, I think it's reasonable to include grants at some dollar figure based on historically how much we've received, on average over some 6 or 10 year period. I don't think it's reasonable to assume we would get zero unless there's some reason for us to assume we're not going to get any grant money going forward. But we have historically received grant money. So I'm all for being conservative, but sometimes being too conservative is just as bad as not being conservative enough. So I don't think it's reasonable to assume zero there. Again, unless someone can indicate a reason why we should think we wouldn't ever get any more grant money. The other thing I wanted to mention was, can we, as you're looking at sidewalk gap projects, even in 2022, is there a way for us to improve how we work on sidewalks based on where development is happening? Because it always makes me really sad when a new road is laid down and then 2 years later we come along and tear it up for some reason. And it just seems to me that if you have a construction project underway and there's going to be some gap, and what comes to mind is Big Rock Park Site B, or Big Rock Park Site A, where there's a development happening and there's been a big stretch of sidewalk put in, and there's like this little stretch of sidewalk that would be able to connect a big chunk of the road to the park so people could have a safe passage along there. And like, we should just plan to do that while the construction crews are there. It almost feels like we would save money as well, right? Like if we could work with that developer to say, hey, like what would be the incremental cost while you've got all these crews here to do this extra oomph of sidewalk? Can we just chip in that marginal amount as opposed to having to bring out all new crews, right? And to work on that one little section. So I would love to see us do a better job of that. I think it would just be more efficient economically, as well as, blocking roads to do construction projects. So there's that part. Impact fees. I know the deputy mayor brought up the fact that we might have some impact fees that are expiring. I can't imagine a scenario where we're not going to spend under $2 million in the next 2 to 3 years on infrastructure projects. I think it would be negligent on our part if we didn't. So I'm hoping that we can just make sure we allocate those funds to projects that we're going to go do. I would certainly hope we're going to do at least $2 million worth of road projects next year. On the same lines, talking about regional projects, are we engaged with our regional partners? Are we having active conversations with them to say, are you planning on doing any of this work? How can we help? How can we help plan? How can we help? Like with the PSRC grant funding project, it seems to me like we should be really coordinating with King County and with Redmond and other regional partners to say, let's really work together. Let's lobby. If all of the cities or all of the jurisdictions involved in that put that on their regional grant funding project, it would probably increase the likelihood of a grant coming in for that. So, Jeff, I don't know, are we doing any of that? Are you guys having conversations with Redmond and King County and Issaquah on these regional projects?
With staffing changes and now getting near capacity again in our department, although we still have some openings in a traffic group, but we are beginning to have those conversations. It used to be that there was a monthly meeting with us in Issaquah and us in Redmond. I know the staff in Redmond have also changed hands. We had one meeting last winter with when the new people came on board. But we have not invested the time to date. We plan to do so, though, in the future.
Okay. I would just highly recommend it felt like years or decades. I'm sure it was only months. But, on the north end, the intersection at East Lake Sammamish Parkway and 202 and the intersection at Sahali and 202 are we can widen our roads all we want to, but until we improve those intersections, the north end is likely not going to get better. And also, as we look at this, I don't see anything, and I realize that these are capital projects, but I don't see anything that talks about how are we planning to move people from Sammamish to the Marymore Link light rail stop that's going to open up in 2024, smack dab in the middle of this tip. Because we have a huge opportunity to reduce traffic and to reduce our very negative impact on the environment with single occupancy vehicle trips by looking at things like, can we set up a shuttle service? Can we get, right? Like, whether it's coordinating with Sound Transit, whether it's coordinating with King County Metro, or whether it's we set something up ourselves, I don't really care. I just think that we should have buses that are running a lot in the morning and the evening, and occasionally in the middle of the day between that light rail stop and the city of Sammamish. And that has to be a number one priority. And if there are regulations that are getting in the way, then you need to raise that up to the council, and we need to be going and virtually camping out on the desks of whoever needs to change those regulations, because we will spend less money in the long run on bus service than we will on making roads 3 and 5 lanes wide, and we will certainly spend an incalculable amount of money less by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by having people on transit as opposed to everybody driving in their cars. And so I just think that has to be a top priority. And even coordinating with the likes of Microsoft and Amazon as well. I think that is just such a huge missed opportunity by not planning for that. We know that we have thousands of people in the city of Sammamish that work at Microsoft alone, and that getting people onto that light rail would be great, because the light rail is going to stop right smack dab in the middle of campus. There's going to be a beautiful pedestrian-only area where you get off, and there will be, places for people to get their morning coffee and things like that. So we really need to be looking at that. And then when you think about Amazon and people going to Bellevue and downtown, I just think that there are thousands of people that would take the light rail if they're heading to Seattle or Bellevue and not have to deal with traffic and parking. So I would like to see us figure out how we can plan in our transportation planning for that.
Okay, thank you. Did you have any other questions, Councilmember Stewart?
I sure do. When will we get the new traffic counts?
That is a great question. We finished them up, I think, this week or last. I'll have to double check. And when I get that information and we synthesize it, we will get that to you. I don't have the ETA right at the moment, but I will check with staff and see how soon that we can make that happen.
Great. Another question is, how does planning for known needed projects, whether it be for safety or capacity, prejudice anything? I mean, going back to the Sahali intersection projects, I am very confused how planning to do something that we know needs to be done. We know that Sahali is going to need something. How does planning for something there prejudice anything?
Jeff, let me step in just for a second.
Yes, thank you.
On the specificity of that answer, I'm only going to answer it in general terms, that legal counsel, it's advised that we not set out any specified projects because of anticipated arguments that we may have to go on the defensive on, and that's what they recommended. So that's what staff has followed.
Okay.
It's kind of is
we have
what it
serious,
is.
Okay. Well, we have serious safety issues. I concur with Councilmember Odell and the mayor that we have at least one, if not two, potential intersections on the north end of Sahali where we absolutely need safety improvements. And we know that there were people come out of Timberline and at the intersection that Councilmember Odell mentioned, that we have people who wait to catch the bus, and they don't even have a sidewalk to stand on. They have to stand, in dirt or grass. And so we know that stuff has to be done, EIS or no EIS. I think it's irresponsible of us not to be planning for something on the north end and not to be continuing to do work to investigate potential options up on the north end there. I know the last time we actually had a meaningful discussion about Sahali, there were a lot of ideas that were thrown out by council. We've never really explored the concept of a slip lane past the Timberline intersection and things like that might be ways to significantly improve the traffic flow without having to put down a whole lot more pavement. And so I feel like we should be continuing to do that work no matter what's going on with the EIS, because we know that improvements need to be made there. In terms of how we're grouping these projects, I'm still confused. I think it's misleading to have a group called Future Concurrency and Growth Projects together. As I would understand it, future concurrency would imply projects that we might need to do to address failures that would be identified with any new concurrency model that the council decides to implement. And I don't even know what a growth project is. So can you explain what a growth project is, Jeff?
Growth is, as development occurs, growth causes trips to be evaluated on a corridor and or intersection. And if those that type of growth triggers a failure as a result of their development through concurrency, that's what we're talking about. And again, at the moment, all the analysis is tied to the EIS going forward.
Okay. I still think, I don't know, that seems like an odd way to call that, and it seems a little bit misleading. And then just my last comment, and I know we'll go back and forth on this probably for a long time, but I just don't think we should defund parks for roads. I think that our parks are such a very well used and appreciated amenity in our community, and that we should not be taking away the funding from parks to fund our roads. I think there are plenty of other revenue sources, which I just want to clarify for the public. We've referenced the number of times that staff put out a draft agenda bill. It was actually released to the public that listed a number of different revenue sources, including property tax increases, utility taxes, transportation benefit districts, bonds. We have a lot of bonding capacity, bonds that could be paid for by taking the banked capacity of our property taxes, right? So we could get a very large bond and be able to pay for that through a small increase in property taxes that could fund many of these projects without having to take the little bit of money that we do give to our parks. So I would highly encourage us not to do that. Our parks are much loved and a very well used amenity in our community.
Let's stick to questions.
So, thank you.
Thank you. And I love our parks, but okay. So coming up next would be Deputy Mayor. I'm going to try to keep us on schedule.
Thank you. Councilmember Stewart, I'm not suggesting we defund our parks. I'm just simply throwing it out as an option that it is a council decision to decide to divide our REIT. We don't have to zero out parks, but it's an option if we get into a place where we can't figure out funding. So a couple things relative to the grants, because I know there's been some other thoughts on that too. And I don't disagree that we should consider the possibility of grants. But I think we have, I think it was $3 million tethered to PSRC's grant. And Jeff, remind me which projects we settled on in our grant.
For the PSRC bucket?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to recall that it was, Doug, can you bring up the map? It'll refresh my memory.
Yeah, I can answer that.
Okay, go ahead, Doug. Thank you.
Yeah, it was the intersection of Sahali and 202. It was the portion of Sahali in the county, and then it was the 228 from Issaquah Pine Lake Road south to city limits.
Sorry, Issaquah Pine Lake Road south to?
Sorry, 228 from Issaquah Pine Lake Road to south to city limits. Sorry if I misstated that.
Okay, like TRO2, which looks like it goes to Klahani Boulevard, or there's two projects?
Right.
That's 228th. TRO2 is Sequoia Pine Lake Road, right? Is that the one or no?
No, it's not that one. It is 228. Yeah.
Okay. Just trying to understand what projects were in there, because while we were talking, I was looking over at PSRC's website and their criteria that they use to evaluate the projects, just trying to figure out how our asks might fit into their projects. And just for edification, it looks like it's around October timeframe, which is ironically when our EIS is scheduled to wrap up as well. So I think if PSRC decides around October on the grant funding, we'll have an idea this year as to whether or not we'll have that. So if we do end up amending our TIP, we would have that information in pocket in a few months anyway. I think, a couple of things that have come up. One is the EIS, and there's been a lot of discussion about Sahali. And there's questions that I want to ask, but I feel like they're executive session type questions. Is it possible that we can go and talk about those? Or
on the EIS?
No, I'm talking because what I'm hearing is that there's interest, and I think the full council has interest in doing something on the north end of the plateau as far as Sahali goes. But I don't want to, preempt our work on the EIS, which is what I'm hearing staff saying. So I feel like there's a conversation to be had there to kind of figure out that should be an executive session, frankly. So if that's something that we can do, otherwise, maybe for in the future, but I have a hard time knowing where to put my finger on this one relative to what I'm hearing staff say, which is EIS must be completed first. That's why it's not on here, versus the need, which I think we recognize, but we need the EIS to help identify the need. Is that a fair statement?
Well, yes, it is. But just recall that you can update your TIP at any time. I know it's got to be frustrating as heck to have to wait on the CIS project, because believe me, it just seems like since I've been here, it's just been reaction to situations that were on the ground or occurring as we're moving along here. And there's more time to wait, and the EIS information will be coming to you this week, and it's a little more drawn out than October. So I think on those items, we're taking note of it, but the council cannot have any input into the EIS process at this point in time. They can't. It's part of the process. So it's best that we don't cross that line.
No, I don't think I'm trying to get into the EIS process. I think I'm trying to understand staff's recommendation is not to do anything on the north end because of the EIS process needing to play out. Is that correct?
Well, I think staff is just dealing with the projects that over time the council has identified. And we're responding to that. As the council wants to expand and look at other issues that need to be solved, we're willing to do that. We're not trying to drive things to the south. I think it just happens that there were a number of impact problems, concurrency problems that will be identified in the EIS that perhaps point more to the north. It's just an assumption here. But all of these other ones were existing issues that we've been trying to address. And I was going to save this for towards the end, but as staff work this up, as Councilmember Stewart pointed out, in the original report, there was more talk of funding. And as we all looked at this, I tried to look at it in the mindset of the budget. I didn't want council to feel that we boxed you in or somehow we're trying to drive council towards other funding mechanisms. Council is fully aware of what is available out there and could give us direction at any time, whether it's to be a business improvement district, a utility tax, the councilmatic bonds, or even beyond that. So we know that you know that those tools are out there. What we wanted to do is give a realistic look at what we saw are problems that need to be addressed with only the money we had, and with a very conservative look at the bonds and or the fee study that needs to be done on stormwater. That's management practices every 3 to 5 years, and it's been 5 years. So that is very reasonable to take a look at. But how much money might be garnered from that, we don't know until we do the study. So I'll just kind of stop at that. That's the framework that we were looking at these problems at, not trying to determine any other thing other than what I've stated.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand, there's nothing, I understand what staff's trying to do is balance the funding that we have on hand with the projects that we can actually initiate and complete within that 6-year window. I guess I'm having a hard time discerning on relative to the EIS and specifically to Sahali as to whether or not if we put a project on our tip for Sahali, whether it be an intersection or whatever it is, are we preempting outcomes on the EIS before we know what those are? I guess that's what I'm trying to understand.
Okay.
Should we or shouldn't we?
Just a judgment on my part. I don't think we're precluding that. What a large issue is if the council has, and I'm sure you have, closely examined the arguments that we have been getting from those on the Growth Management Hearing Board side, have been to be put up a number of arguments that the city has vehemently tried to dispute. And there was a concern about having to spend time and treasure defending what might have been just really honest efforts on the council to identify projects, but then have opposing council perhaps make arguments that were that were perhaps arguments that were unintended. So we didn't want any other unintended consequences. Just an assumption on my part, but.
Okay. Well, so obviously there's a balancing act here, between, what the EIS is going to say. I think I heard at least one council member, I think it was Councilmember Stewart, say she doesn't like ripping up pavement. I agree. That's part of my concern is that if we do an intersection project up on Sahali, which I know is needed, but if we do that and then we come up with the full project, like are we ripping up our own work and spending money that we then have to tear out? We can't even answer that question right now. So I guess I don't know about, the projects on Sahali. Yes, I think we know we need to do something. I just don't know what or when based on timing. I think one question, and it's come up a couple times this evening, is relative to the South End and the projects slated by the Issaquah School District to build in the city of Issaquah, but on our road frontage is the impacts of that school. And I know we had a very robust conversation about that, and we've opted to continue working with the district so that we can kind of gel our two sides on their impact. But we already have Southeast 40th failing, so we cannot expect them to pay for that. Is that a fair assumption? That would be on the city because it's already failing.
I'll let Jeff answer that.
Yeah, it goes to the argument of proportion. It goes to the argument of proportionate share. They may have impact that is a proportionate share towards that, as I understand it.
Well, but once you have a failing intersection, you can't make it you know, an F is an F, right? You can't have like an F minus.
Right.
I think that's what I'm trying to figure out. Whose responsibility is that failing intersection already? Is that fall squarely on the shoulders of the city of Sammamish? Even though they'll have an impact on it.
Right.
Or is there a percentage of that intersection that we could obtain funding potentially for a fix there from the district?
The district is helping to identify a solution. The solution could be a signal. It could be a PED activated only. It could be a number of those solutions. Right. I'm sorry, what?
At that particular intersection at 40th?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Those alternatives are being looked at. And we're also trying to look at, concurrent with that, I know it's a long answer, but are we attracting new trips through the neighborhood that nobody wants? And if we do, how do we mitigate those things? So
not we, them, right? Because that doesn't land on us. Isn't that an impact of the schools that they would need to mitigate for?
And that might be a point that we can use to negotiate on that intersection.
Okay. Because that would be, my, desire is that, if a developer were building houses, they would pay the impact to mitigate, right? It wouldn't fall to the city. I know there's the proportional share and that, they can't pay for 100% of their impact per state law, but there's that intersection. But then we had talked also about the Itzquil Pine Lake Road 228 intersection and potential impacts there, but they would mitigate for that.
Yes, because that's not failing just yet.
Right,
it's on the cusp of failing, but yes. If they trigger it, they have to then work with the city to pay their proportionate share of what they caused towards that failure.
Right, okay. And then relative to the traffic impact fees, Councilmember Stewart said something like, well, I would hope we were going to spend $2 million. Yes, but TIF funds are not, projects aren't 100%. You can't use impact fees for 100% of a project. So it's only a percentage. And I think you had a thing running on the side, which we've had on previous tips before, which says how much in impact fees it's eligible for. So that's why I was asking questions about the TIF funding, is whether or not we were slated to spend it before it expired, because it depends on the project. Not every project we have on here is TIF eligible either. So I think that was kind of why I was asking about the funds.
And Jeff probably has something more to say here too, but let me express to you now that those funds have been sitting there for years and not been spent, and depends on where and how they were contributed as to where they can be spent.
Yes.
And that's why they could be in a position to be refunded. And
yeah, exactly. That's the point I was trying to make. Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Is that, yes, Councilmember Stewart, we're going to spend a lot of money, but not all of those projects we can spend those TIF dollars on. So it's important to understand where they can be spent and to what percentage. That's what I was trying to make sure. I don't want them to expire. I don't want to give anybody their traffic impact fees back. We need them. We need to use them. So our projects should be prioritized so that they don't expire. And I'm assuming staff probably already figured that out and done that.
That's exactly what we're concerned about, because we're looking at discovering that and going, what the heck happened? Why have we got these monies at this point in time that we have to contemplate refunding them? You have that in another area that we're trying to sort out, where roads were never completed. And if we put them through, there would be a lot of pitchforks and burning torches at City Hall, and we probably have to return some money. So we're being told.
Okay.
So it can happen.
Good. Yeah, no, it'd be good, I think, for council to understand where those TIF funds have to be spent before they expire, because that would really be a shame to have to return money.
Absolutely, and we're getting clarity on it, and we're going to share it all with you.
Great, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, then the next up, let me go through. Oh, I think it's me. Okay, so my comments for the second round is, I think we need to keep the projects that are on on the list, like the 202 and East Lake Sammamish Parkway, Sahali 202, those big projects I think need to stay on. If they were on our Sammamish Priorities project for Olympia, I think they should stay on the list. And if that means they're at the bottom and you have them in, I don't care if they're in purple. I mean, I don't care what color you make them, but I think they need to be on that list, you know, separated out, but they need to remain on that list somehow. Even if they're on the bottom in a different color and clearly separate, but I do think they need to remain on that list. The next,
Doug, can you go back to the summary list? Thank you. With the revenue, can you,
yep.
The one that has the revenue. Just so that we're all, I think, there we go. Whoop, there we go.
Yeah, so you can have them separate on, yep. Yeah, because I just think they need to be on there. Okay, then the next thing is we owned a second place in Idaho for a number of years, and I watched because people were not walking the overpasses, they just weren't taking them. Because they didn't want to walk the stairs going up and the stairs coming back down on the other side. It was just easier to walk across the road. But one of the things, so they noticed this being a problem, and they noticed that, you know, rather than do that, what they did on some of their busier roads where they were able to do it, so it wasn't in their downtown streets, but what they were able to do on some of their busier roads was they actually went under. So, you know, maybe we could look into something like that. And I know in some cases they said it equated out to the same sort of price, but I don't know what it would be here. I have no idea. But we'd have the same effect, and then we wouldn't have to worry about them still running across the road. Because they said it worked much better. At least that was what I read in the papers when they were doing it. Okay, and then, and as far as the grant funds being estimated and should they be used and how long and them being included in, you know what, I think that, you know, to me, it's, if we're going to be using expenses that are estimated and that's okay, and we're going to be using some other stuff that's estimated and that okay, then, you know, you make the call across the board. You can't pick and choose on those things. So if you're going to use estimates and you are comfortable with the fact that every time you do put in for grant money, you get a certain percentage back, you know what, put it in there. If you do not put in for it, then don't put it in here. But to me, if we're using estimates like that, I don't think we should be picking and choosing, you know, what estimates belong into these reports. I think that's misleading as well. But again, that's my opinion. Okay, so next up would be Councilmember Odell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Continuing on this probability theme, Jeff, what would be your definition of high, good, and fair probabilities? What kind of percentiles would you give those?
Yeah, the high probability are in the 85 to 90 or higher. We know that the REIT is conservative. We already know our traffic impact fee calculations are reasonable, and we already know that we got money from the state. So those are, you know, very high, 85% or better. On the good, 65 to 80% probability, I think is a good margin. Agencies typically will, plan for 5 to 15% of their capital program, their grants. I can't say that's what happened here at Sammamish, but looking forward, based on what the projects we have and the funding sources, I think there's a good chance of getting money in this next 6-year window. King County Flood is a very good program. We can come back and talk to you more about that program, and some of you already know it very well, but there's a very good chance that they fund one project per year per agency for good quality projects. So in my opinion, I thought it made good sense. PSRC, that's why I put it into the other group. And whether the council wants to make adjustments to the utility, as city manager said, we are up for a rate review in the storm utility, and that review ought to include, shares towards capital transportation projects. So, but that's not as a strong possibility or probability at the moment, so I just rated it as fair. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. What is our capability of actually pursuing these grants within the city?
We are making application to King County this next week for Lewis Thompson Road. That'll be the recommended project going forward. So that's an application to be made for a maximum of $400,000. So we feel that that's a good application. Transportation Improvement Board, it'll depend on the project and the partnerships and whether it's a level of service or safety project that we're dealing with. And I don't know, for instance, on Lewis Thompson Road, if we've got a lot of accidents there. That was the conversation that we had with our funding partner from TIB. And there were 2 other projects that we thought would score well. Issaquah, Pine Lake Road Phase 1, if we have most of the money in play and we're looking for the last construction dollars in, TIB likes to be last in. And when you're asking for $2 to $3 million, I think we have a good competitive project.
Okay, thank you. A couple of different people, you've mentioned it, so as the city manager, that there are, and it was in the agenda bill for today on this issue, there are a number of different potential sources of revenue. Overall tax increase, utility tax, transportation benefit district, and bonds. I don't think you answered this before. Do we have any good feel for what the transportation benefit district might do for us, given certain assumptions?
We do. I don't have those in front of me. Chris might remember, Chris Giannini. We actually have worked on a draft presentation that we haven't had the opportunity to come before council, but it was in the, I want to say $3 million annually, but I have to come back with you what we think the numbers are.
So we're scheduled to take this up again on June 1st. Could you have it by then?
Yeah, I believe so. I'll have to think about that, but let me assume that I can at least provide what we've done to date. I'll have to look at that.
Okay. Same kind of question on bonds. The councilmanic bonds, say we borrowed $100 million. What would be the annual carrying cost of that, or servicing cost?
That one I'm going to turn over to Finance Director Aaron. Can you begin to help with that? Or not?
Can you hear me okay?
There you go. Thank you.
I'm getting a bad echo on this one. So yes, we've updated. So it's going to depend on the bond market, of course, and the interest rate at the time of issuance. So we can do a benchmark if we're looking to collect that information for the June meeting. You want a $100 million issue, and the debt servicing for $100 million, is that the requested illustration?
Can you say that again? I'm involved in a side conversation here with one of the technical people.
I was just clarifying that the request was for a $100 million issue.
Just as a benchmark, yeah.
Okay. We can have that estimate for you for the June.
Okay. Thank you. Another question, which I think is my last. Actually, I do have 2 more. One is a question, one is a statement. Could we also get a list of the next 6 projects you'd like to look at? Not necessarily in the next 6 years, but the next 12? So that this council may look at sliding something forward and moving something back? Jeff?
Yes, we can work towards that from the long-range list, as well as some of the projects that were identified in the unadopted transportation master plan, there's a bundle of projects that we can look at.
Okay, thank you. Well, I appreciate that. Another, just a comment, and that is the city has had some success, limited success in the past, of working with our regional neighbors and the county and WashDOT on synchronizing lights on Sahalee Way and 202 all the way into Redmond. We did it manually at the time. It took basically almost an act of Congress to get the meeting together, but it's going to take something like that to solve the problem overall on the 202 corridor and also on the Issaquah end of things. But we need to start those dialogues now rather than later, perhaps starting at East Side Transportation Partnership. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to continue through our cycle of round 2 here. I'm going to go with Councilmember Gamblin. Do you have any questions?
Nope, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Ross.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, and Councilmember Treen.
Hey, Jeff and your staff, I just want to thank you guys for all the hard work and the information you put forward. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Hopefully you like the color coding.
I enjoyed that immensely.
Hey, I love the color coding. Okay, so we have a couple of extra questions here. Do we want to start another round?
Please.
It's a study session.
It's a study session, jeez.
We're studying.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to fix those rules. We don't usually go 2 hours on one topic. All right. All right, I'm going to, rather than go a full round here, how about one question each? Do you think you guys could make one question each? Yeah, pick your next question.
I have 3. No, I think it's important that we be able to get all of our questions.
Yeah, well, you know, it's been 2 hours, so try to combine your question. And let's go, Councilmember Stewart.
All right, well, I'm just going to make a big, long run-on sentence. As I understood it from Victor, when how we choose to correct the intersection down at the south end on 228th will potentially be what drives traffic through that neighborhood, not necessarily the school. I'd like to know if that's accurate. I'm sorry, I think we need to ask all these questions. What about the federal funding that we're getting? Can we use any of that for infrastructure? And when will we be able to get the list of projects that we would need to do to make sure we don't lose those transportation impact fees? Because I think deciding on the tip is going to be pretty critical on that. And then I just want to throw out there that for a couple of years now, I've been saying we should definitely consider bonds. Interest rates are historically low. The interest rates are definitely going to be going up in the future, and we should seriously consider borrowing that money before those interest rates rise because they are so incredibly low. I think it's a really good opportunity right now.
Let's stick to the topic right now so we can at least have a shot of.
I thought funding sources was the topic.
Yeah.
Other council members have
we are not on funding sources tonight. Okay, so Jeff, do you want to take
actually, Jeff specifically asked us for input on that.
Do you want her to take a hit at her 3 questions?
I'll need her to repeat them respectfully. Your 3 questions, Pam, could you go?
Sure. Yeah, so the first one, for the projects, we have those transportation impact fees that we may lose if we don't use them soon. When will we have the list of projects that we need to make sure we get done in that time frame? When will you know what those projects are?
The list is in here as a part of the TIP. They're identified in the corridor safety block where we showed, obviously we went too fast for you to see that, but can you go to the corridor? There you go, Doug. So one of the projects is Issaquah Pine Lake Road as a project that has eligibility of 50.2%. And then the next one up, go up one, Doug, 47.5% for East Lake Damage Parkway / Southeast 24th. Those are the two primary ones that I know what the proportionate share eligibility is at this time.
So do you know if there are potentially any others? Because I think it's important that we as council understand that, like, we need to prioritize one or both of those on the tip and make sure we get those done so that we don't lose those funds, correct?
We will come back with the list.
Okay, that's great. Because I think I don't like giving back money either. We were talking about the intersection down on 228th, and I forget, is it?
228th and 40th?
Yes, thank you. As I understood it when Victor was presenting, he was saying that depending on how we choose to correct that intersection, that if we put a stoplight there, that putting the stoplight there is what's going to drive the traffic through the neighborhood, not necessarily the school. Because it will make it easier for people to make that left turn out of the neighborhood onto 228th.
Determining the right solution at that intersection is what we're reviewing. The school is the trigger. They're the ones causing us to do the review at this time, depending upon the number of trips that come as a result of the boundary for the school itself. A signal has the ability to attract trips through there, and thus there would have to be corresponding neighborhood mitigation, which the team right now is taking a look at. What does that look like? So they're reviewing all three of the options, or three options, and are doing the analysis, and we're waiting the results of that.
Okay, but just to be clear, like, that intersection is already failing. So I get that, like, there will be more traffic generally in that area because of the school, but that intersection is already failing.
That's a true
Correct.
statement.
Okay. All right, great. And then the other one was, and as I understood it, Jeff, you did want to get some input potentially on funding sources. What about the federal funding that we're eligible to get? Would any of that be able to be used on infrastructure? I mean, that's what, $14 million?
I'll defer to the city manager on that one.
The guidance just came out. We haven't had time to go through it. But I just, in reviewing an email that will be shared with you guys tonight, that the feds have come out and it looks like we may only get $4 million. Far cry from $14 million. So I wouldn't spend all the money yet. And I don't mean to be flippant. We're all frustrated at these numbers, waiting for them to be verified. But we're being told they sound like they're final. But at any rate, we don't know what infrastructure means yet out of those guidelines. It just came out yesterday.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So, quick question. The mayor was talking about the grant funding and estimates, and I'm curious, what estimates do we have on here aside from the grants?
Doug, can you go back to the summary page? Yes. Okay. So I'm not sure what the mayor meant. You'd have to ask her, what she was referring to. But the way that I review this, they're an estimate of, I'm estimating that we're going to get 2 grants from King County flood, each at $400,000. That's a grant revenue estimate on my part.
Okay, I think she's referring to other estimates, and that's what I was trying to figure out. What else is an estimate on here?
The expenses for each of the projects are estimates, right?
Okay.
So when we break out each project, each of those will have their own estimate when that detail is provided.
Okay, so let me ask you a question on the project costs then. I mean, obviously they're estimates, and we never know. Case in point, it's Quail Falls City Road, right?
Right.
But I think I remember that we were trying to dial in our project costs a lot closer to what the costs were actually going to be. I think in the past, they got a little, the numbers were really soft, and we've tried to dial it in a little bit more. So I guess I'm trying to figure out, are these numbers are they better estimates than what we used to have? I think we were trying to move that way. And I've noted specifically on Issaquah Pine Lake Road, and I pulled up our 2020 tip, it was, and the total project cost was supposed to be 19.6, and of course the 2020 tip was done in 2019, and now we're at 22.9 million. So the project cost has gone up. Is that because we have done a better estimate, or is that because we're just using inflation to?
So, yeah, I can't speak to the history of 2019. I can assure you on Issaquah Pine Lake Road, staff has provided us with the most current 60% estimate, and that estimate puts the project cost from our consultant on that one project at a higher rate than what you alluded to for 2019.
Okay. Which is,
and why I don't know yet. Why I don't know, but we can dive into that.
Okay. And I mean, it would be good to know we don't have to go there tonight. I'm just trying to determine if, you know, the costs are rising because you have a better estimate because we're doing work on it. We've obviously spent $481,000 since we last did our tip because the total project cost is over here as well. So obviously we're working on the project. I'm just trying to determine if we think this is a pretty accurate number, not just for Issaquah Pine Lake Road, but generally speaking for the project.
So when Doug and I went through to create these high-level estimates, we used project cost estimating from, you know, the projects on hand. Issaquah Pine Lake Road was a good example where we had a detailed number. Where we also looked at the 2020 or 2019, I can't remember which it is, but again, the transportation master plan had cost estimates from there that we pulled to pull in these numbers. And I also did some corridor calculations based on estimates and dollars spent to see if we're still in the ballpark, and felt pretty comfortable about that as well. What we want to do in the future, just sidebar, is we want to come back to the council when those costs change, like at a 30%, 60%, 90%, and tell you why they're changing, or community input cost changes. We haven't got there yet, but our intention is to do that in the future so that we know if there's a change, what's causing it, and to have your participation in understanding it.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be great and helpful along the way, definitely. Thanks, Jeff. One additional thought, and as far as the grant discussion goes, in our previous tip, based on the council conversation and its reluctance to include grant funding previously, I looked on here, and this might satisfy kind of both sides of this issue, is we had two different categories for tip funding sources. One was awarded grants, so money that we knew we were getting. So for Issaquah Falls City Road Phase 2, if it were on here, we have a TIB grant, or we have a grant for that, right, for $1.5 million. And then there is the anticipated grant section. So maybe we can have the grants bifurcated between ones we have in hand and ones we are potentially anticipating getting. That way we can see what we have in hand and what we might get. And you can reference that on our 2020 tip, Jeff, just for.
I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, our 2020 tip just breaks it out. That might be a good solution going forward to have those two different buckets for revenue sources on the tip.
Yeah, let me think about that.
Oh, okay. I can send you a copy too. I mean, I'm sure you have it, but.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, sure. All right. Thank you. That's all I had.
Okay, if there's no more questions, then Jeff, you guys, great presentation. Great job answering all of our questions. You did a good job.
Hey, Madam Mayor, the Deputy Mayor raised a good point. Why isn't Issaquah Falls City Road Phase 2 on here? Because that does have, what, $2.5 million worth of grant funding that we would give up if we don't do it, correct?
It actually has, I think, $1.5 million left on it.
Okay.
And it would break the bank. You don't have enough money.
Okay, but I do think it's important to share with the public that we would be foregoing $1.5 million if we don't, correct?
Well, that's a predetermination that the staff hasn't made because we're actually doing design work on it. But the grant money is for construction, and so we'll be getting back to the council on what the council would like to do.
Okay, I think it's important that we get answers to those questions, please.
Sure. Yeah, and we plan on doing that.
Okay, thank you, Dave. All right, and with that, let's take a 5-minute health and safety break, and then we'll move on to our next topic. Be back at 10 minutes after 9. Next up, we have got a discussion on the Sammamish Municipal Code, Title 7A, Parks and Recreation, and this is Anjali and Grayson Court.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, City Council, and Mr. City Manager. I'm Anjali Maya, Director of the Parks, Recreation, and Facilities Department. Our topic for tonight is to introduce the update to the park rules in the Sammamish Municipal Code. Sammamish, as you know, inherited its code from King County and has made a few updates from time to time to its park rules through the years. But this time, however, we are embarking on a complete rewrite of the park rules to better organize the information and account for activities that didn't exist previously. Your packets do include a draft of the proposed updates to the code that has gone through significant internal staff review, as well as incorporated feedback from the City Attorney, Parks and Recreation Commission, and the public. The goal of park rules is really to keep our public places feeling safe and welcoming to all people. And park safety is the responsibility of both the police department and the Department of Parks and Recreation. And so to that end, we have worked closely with Chief Pingree and his team on the code rewrite. Grayson Court, management analyst for our department, has been leading this effort and will make the presentation tonight and walk you through all the changes. Chief Pingree, Sergeant Elias, and Chris Jordan are also available to answer questions. We welcome your input, questions after the presentation. And just so you know, unlike other code updates, we are not required to take this through a public hearing process. Based on the questions we receive, we will either bring this topic back to a second study session or directly for adoption at a future meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Grayson for the presentation.
All right, good evening. So today's presentation is City Code Changes, Sammamish Municipal Code Title 7A, Parks and Recreation. Technical difficulties, great. So today's presentation overview, we will be covering the objective of what we aim to do here today. We're also going to provide an overview of the significant changes as part of this proposal. We will be providing an overview of the feedback we received from constituents and stakeholders, overview of the timeline, and questions, feedback, and recommendations will be available at the end of this presentation. You have a great team of staff that'll be able to answer any and all of your questions. So our objective this evening, does City Council recommend any additional changes or updates to the proposed changes that we're talking about today at today's study session? First, an overview of the current park rules. The reason that the City of Sammamish has a park rule system is to provide a system by which the greatest number of people may obtain the maximum satisfaction. Now, there's a number of different ways that this is enforced and this is ensured. First and foremost would be voluntary compliance, and this is through the education and outreach and the signage efforts by the city to educate park users about the rules of the park system. Other ways of enforcement is also assigning penalties such as civil infractions or criminal misdemeanors if folks violate these rules. Other ways of enforcing this is the loss of park facility use privileges or also ejection from the park area, ultimately being subject to enforcement by Sammamish PD. Overview of the current structure of the park rules is in Title 7A, Parks and Recreation, Chapter 7.12, Park Rules. It's broken out into 7 categories. There's general rules, there's administrative rules, there's all rules that are considered infractions bunched together, as well as those rules that are considered misdemeanors all combined together. Then we have sections on penalties, enforcement, and then there's some miscellaneous provisions. So the overview of the approach to changes in this proposal is ultimately first starting what is the goal. And first and foremost, the goal is to be able to provide clarity and transparency to the public, to the community of the park rules, the city laws that oversee the park system. Also to be able to create consistency and alignment with city, county, state, and federal laws. Being able to respond to current events and issues that we see now in our park system. And then, of course, to be able to communicate those new rules to the public when they're out in the park system. So there's a number of different ways and steps that we're going to do this. And first and foremost is what's called a repeal and replace. So what this means is that we are removing Title VII, Parks and Recreation, and then we replace that with Title VIIA, Parks and Recreation. And this is an effort not just to reorganize content, but then to be able to use this as an opportunity to update current language, add new topics, and then remove any conflicting or redundant topics. The city has gone through a very thorough and comprehensive and holistic development and review process. And this was not just done by the Parks and Recreation Department. This was done in concert and with feedback and participation with a number of different stakeholders, with not just within the city, but within our community and external partners. But most importantly, as you'll see there listed down at the bottom, are Sammamish residents. And we will be providing a little bit of an overview of what that feedback was in just a little bit. So now we're on to the overview of Sammamish Municipal Code Title VIIA, and these are the proposed changes. So first of all, we are doing the rearrangement, and so these would be the new chapters. So as you recall from a previous slide, we had an overview of the current Parks Code organized around general rules, administrative rules, infractions. What we're doing here is now we are categorizing everything by the different type of activity. So now it's going to be very easy for a general member of the public, for a resident, to be able to understand what are the rules around vehicles, what are rules around swimming, trail use. Very easy to do. Now, this slide is an overview of all the different chapters. The content within it is found in the exhibit. This is in going to be the exhibit, and what you'll see in the agenda bill is the actual legislative changes, legislative formatting. That if and when that this is presented to council as an ordinance, this is what the language would be for those actual changes, for those actual rules. But for the sake of time, in order to be able to go through the study session, we are going to be focusing right now on the significant changes that are going to be occurring as part of this revision process. As an overview, we mentioned this a little bit previously, is reducing redundancies by citing current city laws. So for example, in Sammamish Municipal Code 1.10.010 on general penalties, this is where it outlines the differences between infractions and the differences between misdemeanors. And we're creating alignment with what's already in the current code. In addition, then adopting as reference and aligning city code with state RCWs, King County rules, and federal laws. And also establishing the correct penalties for certain rules, such as infractions and misdemeanors. And it's, again, taking a holistic view of the current rules that we currently have and making a determination if these rules still stand as an infraction or as a misdemeanor. This is, again, our opportunity to make those decisions. And then lastly is then also establishing a new fine structure, or what's also called a bail schedule for the infractions. And so the fine limits within the proposed bail schedule here that we see listed were recommended by the Sammamish Police Department, as these limits are the same as what you would see in the King County Park System. So some violations, such as speeding tickets and others, have increased over time, but the park fines had remained consistent. So this was a meaningful fee threshold that the city is proposing as part of the bail schedule. This slide provides an overview of now the new content. So as part of these significant changes, in addition to taking some old code that we currently have and improving them, making some adjustments, we're also taking new content as well. And we've done this in 3 different ways. One is the department bringing to the Parks and Recreation Commission some topics in which we got some feedback on, and we're going to provide an overview of those topics in a little bit. We also brought in some content from existing signage that we already have around the park system. So this essentially would be just codifying some rules that we're already communicating to the public, but making sure that we have it on the books. Last one then is some specific department needs. So for instance, unintended use. So unintended use would refer to the participation of any activity, practice, game, or sports that conflicts with normal intended usage. So for instance, commonly, many cities would use this rule to prohibit park users from playing golf on a baseball field, as this can lead to considerable damage of the playing surface. Other ones included were brain restrictions, freedom from discrimination, and then one on anchorage, and that is the actual act of setting anchor in an associated marine area if you're on a boat. So on to the feedback from the Parks and Recreation Commission. So I mentioned on a previous slide, the city brought to the Parks and Recreation Commission a number of different topics, and we wanted to get some feedback and guidance. So these topics were mountain bikes, specifically marijuana use, drones or what's called unmanned aircraft systems, toy motorized devices, electric and small motorized mobility devices, private businesses, and large groups. And through this process, we asked the Commission, should we incorporate these topics into an updated city code? And if yes, should it be for all park sites within the park system? Should it be limited to only certain park sites or other regulations? So first, the topic was on mountain bikes. And this was the question that came to the Commission was, should we allow mountain bikes in the park system? And as we've had these conversations, we started going into conversations about, well, should we have mountain bikes? Should we have street bikes? Should we have electric bikes? And so from all these conversations, and we'll talk a little bit about this later as well, there's some other slides that relate to this. In the end, what the department and the Commission kind of discussed and felt was best moving forward was rather than regulating the mode of transportation, so for instance, in this case, mountain bikes, is regulating the safety of the travel. So first, it would then be setting a standardized speed limit for all types of travel, including bicycles or mountain bikes. One thing that's really important here is that this is just part of the rule. It's not just any 15 miles per hour and that's it. It's only part of the new changes, and in order to ensure safe travel within the park areas, the following additional requirements would also have to be followed at all times. No person may travel at a speed greater than what is reasonable and prudent under the conditions, and having regard to the actual and potential hazards that are existing, and that no person may travel in a negligent manner, which means any form of travel in such a manner as to endanger or be likely to endanger any persons or property. So again, not the mode of transportation itself, but is it traveling safely within the park system? With marijuana use, this was with the it's not new any longer, but with Washington State legalizing recreational use of marijuana. What the department and what the Commission agreed on was adopting as reference state law, RCW 69.50.445, which is using and consuming marijuana in a public place. So with drones or unmanned aircraft systems, it's a very complicated topic. So the city, along with other local jurisdictions, is limited in how to regulate the use of unmanned aircraft systems, or which are commonly known as drones. Congress has provided the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, with the exclusive authority to regulate aviation safety. So, and what's important about this is that that also applies and extends to drones, as the FAA considers drones as a form of aircraft. So probably the best way to describe this is, imagine if I am at a store, I want to buy a drone, I take the drone home, I unpackage it, I register it like I'm supposed to, and I take it out to my backyard and I put it down and I start it up. As soon as that drone lifts off the ground, it immediately enters airspace that's controlled by the United States government. Cities, local governments, states are really limited in how they can actually regulate that. One thing that they can do through their land use powers, though, is be able to decide where they would like the drones to be able to, within the city, lift up, and land. So as it relates to the discussion that we have today and it relates to the scope of this project, then the question is, are drones allowed to lift up and land within a city park? So at this time, what the city will continue to do is prohibit the use of any city park areas as what called landing sites, lifting up and setting down for all aircraft, which would then also include the unmanned aircraft systems or drones. And by doing that, it would simply be incorporating the term drones in underneath the definition currently of aircraft, and that's where that would then fall. Toy and motorized devices. So currently in city parks, there is a prohibition of toy boats in associated marine areas. The idea is that if you are swimming in the lake and your head is right above water and you have little toy boats zipping around, that can be a safety hazard. And through some of these discussions, one thing that the city received from feedback from the Parks and Recreation Commission was also to extend that to the prohibition of toy cars and trucks on unpaved trails, as that could cause some safety issues for those who utilize the trail system. Electric and small motorized mobility devices. So as I mentioned that this is part of the conversation that we also had on mountain bikes. And again, here we are establishing similar, a standard speed limit for all types of travel, including e-bikes, electric and small motorized mobility devices. So again, not just 15 miles an hour, but again, remembering that any travel that's reasonable and prudent regard to actual potential hazards that are existing and not traveling in a negligent manner. And so that would then not just apply to the mountain bikes that we were talking about, but there's this e-bike that you see on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you see here is an electric scooter. And in the middle there, what you see is what's called a hoverboard. So same rules apply. Not regulating the mode of transportation there, the safety of the travel of those electric and small motorized mobility devices. That's the term definition that those are used as. So with private businesses, and this is something that's new and something that we again approach to get feedback from the Parks and Recreation Commission, is for-profit entities are being prohibited from conducting private business in a city park. So there's an example here. We have a group of folks who are taking a yoga class in the middle of the city park, so that would not be allowed. And that would be part of our new city code. Then with large groups, one new addition would then be groups larger than 25 individuals. They only be allowed by special use permit unless permission is previously obtained through a rental reservation. All right, next, feedback from residents. So as part of the city's ongoing efforts and to engage the Sammamish community, provide transparency and solicit public feedback to support decision-making, the city provided residents the opportunity to review and provide feedback on the proposed changes to city park rules. The public feedback process began on February 16 and remained open through March 7. The proposed rules, along with opportunities to engage with city staff, were hosted on Connect Sammamish and included a project summary, links to the current Sammamish Municipal Code, links to past presentations to the Sammamish Parks and Recreation Commission, project timeline, survey tool to provide feedback, and staff contact information. Through the public engagement process, the city released notifications using several social media platforms, and overall engagement during this public review comment period resulted in 608 total visitors to the Connect Sammamish page with about 57 individual comments. And so when members visited the Connect Sammamish page, and that's an image that you see there on the right. We asked 3 questions to the public. Are there safety issues that occur in city parks that staff need to be aware of? Are there certain activities conducted by other members of the public that disrupt your enjoyment when visiting a city playground, sports field, etc.? And are there certain rules that interfere with your enjoyment when visiting a city park? And so the feedback that we received was primarily on issues around and concerns around off-leash dogs and park users disobeying dog leash laws. Park users not wearing masks, so very specific to the COVID area that we are in now, and then dog waste. So for more details about the public feedback process, as well the feedback that we received from residents, in the agenda bill as well, we have as an exhibit a staff report which provides the background of how the process went, the feedback that we received back from residents. So we're wrapping up a little bit on the timeline that we have for the remainder of this project. So again, this project has taken some time. So project start date was about 2 years ago, June 26, 2019. We went to the commission 3 times, once just as an introduction to let the Parks and Recreation Commission know what to expect. And when we went back and forth with the Parks and Recreation Commission on 2 different occasions. We received public feedback over a period of 3 weeks, and now we are presenting to City Council study session today for review. And we do have tentatively scheduled a June 8th meeting for Council study session, depending on how the meeting goes this evening and the direction that Council would like to go. Dependent on that, City would then finalize City Code and then introduce an ordinance at an upcoming City Council regular meeting for adoption. So with that, that actually concludes this presentation. Questions, feedback, and recommendations. And again, we would like to know, does City Council recommend any additional changes or updates to the proposals that you folks see here today? Thank you very much.
Great, excellent presentation. Okay, first up, we have got Councilmember O'Dell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A very good presentation, and I appreciate having this ahead of time. The fines are put in as 47 and 138, and that's based on, I think, what King County is doing, if I recall correctly.
That is correct.
Is that really enough to have a deterrent effect? We might want to think about
I think, yeah, we might have Chief Pingree respond to that.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi. This is Dan Pingree.
Yeah, Dan.
Yes. There's some real bad feedback somewhere.
I think anyone at City Hall needs to mute or we get the feedback.
So the fine amount is it's a consistent fine amount similar to what you see in other cities and with King County. We're trying not to make it so impactful that people aren't able to enjoy the parks, but at the same time provide a deterrent. I think we've had this discussion before you were on council about different fines, and it's always debatable. But I think the key is being consistent. Initially, obviously, we'll be giving a lot of warnings and discussing things, especially on rules that have changed. But $47 is still impactful. Lets people know that it's activity or actions that are prohibited. And if it subsequently happens again, it could be 138. And the next easiest step, as opposed to continuing to write those tickets, would be to then trespass or prevent someone from utilizing our park, which then becomes criminal in nature and has obviously a much more significant impact. So it's a combination of deterrence, education, and hopefully compliance, so that we don't have to get to that point.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Dan, as long as you're on the line, how often do you guys get called to the parks? Like, how many calls did you get last year?
I don't have that off the top of my head. And last year just doesn't, last year the parks were closed, so the majority of our calls were people were in the parks when they shouldn't be or not obeying signs, and then it was limited. So last year's really a poor example.
Good point. How about a normal year?
Yeah, and normally, I mean, we'll get calls to the park about, but usually it's more problems with parking. Oftentimes we'll have large groups in the evening, obviously people in there after hours or in the restrooms. Problems, with fishing, where we'll be looking for licenses and those types of things, or working with state game. It's, as the weather progresses, we get more people, and then we will have more calls. Oftentimes, again, when you have families that are out trying to enjoy it, and you potentially have other individuals that are drinking, loud, obnoxious, that's when we'll see the calls, and we'll come in and try and help prevent that from behavior from occurring. So it progresses with the sunshine and decreases with the cold weather. We make regular park patrols, and in working with the Parks Department, we close the parks. So we make a point of going in and doing a thorough check and checking the restrooms and making sure that everything's secure. So there's a lot of on-view patrol activity that takes place as well. And I can get you the exact number, I just don't have that.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to see that. Different question. I thought I saw somewhere a definition of pets, which I thought needed to be tightened a little bit in view of some fact that we have some exotic pets out there, like the Siberian tiger that was running around Houston today. But another issue is a lot of people have pet pigs, and pigs can be terribly destructive, particularly in a natural environment. So I think we might want to take another look at that list.
Okay, we'll do that.
Okay, last question. Anjali, I thought I saw somewhere that bikers were not allowed in Beaver Lake Park, or Beaver Lake Preserve, rather, but are they allowed at Evans Creek Preserve?
No, they aren't allowed at Evans Creek Preserve.
Okay. Is that specifically spelled out somewhere?
Yes, it should be on our rule signs at the entry kiosks at both parking lots.
Okay. All right, thank you. No further questions.
Okay, next we have got Councilmember Stewart, followed by Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I just have one question. I saw as I was browsing through, one proposed change was to not allow businesses to use the park in conducting business. I'm wondering if we should consider some sort of special use permit. I know that a number of small businesses throughout the city run like summer camps and things like that, where they might take the kids to the park for part of the day or for lunch or something. And I feel like I think I agree with the general concept that like you shouldn't be able to run your business out of our parks or something. But I do think there might be some times when we would like to allow, summer camps and things that can go to the park, and not all of our summer camps are nonprofits. So, and there may be others, like just because that's the only one I could think of, there may be other exceptions we might want to look at for that as well.
Actually, it's written for exactly how you pointed it out. So,
I misunderstood that.
No, but it's a good point. So, you don't want a business like a for-profit to run entirely out of the park, and because if you get a request from one, next you'll have 50 different folks wanting to do that. But, we have kids from Sammamish that'll go visit Seattle parks, and kids from, who also visit parks within Sammamish, and they can do that. What we find is it's just better to know that that's coming, and so we have them then fill out a special use permit. Just small, it could be knowing that there will be a parking impact, or knowing that the restrooms sometimes just get impacted. The toilet paper runs out soon. So, for those reasons, and that's part of the code rewrite, to make sure that if there are groups larger than 25 coming to the parks, that they would get a special use permit.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I should have known you would have already thought of it. Thanks.
Deputy Mayor?
I'm just kind of curious about the enforceability of some of this stuff, specifically drone use. It can be really hard to identify when a drone is up in the air where the person on the other end of it is. And, you know, I believe right now we don't allow them in our parks. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, yeah, I thought I remembered seeing that signage up there. So, you know, I'm fine with it. I'm just kind of curious about the enforceability and whether or not we've had any issues specific to drones at all.
I'm not aware. I'll try and answer this, and then Chief, if you have anything to add, by all means. So, and because we can't enforce them once they're in the air, really what we can control is no, you know, takeoff and landing from within our parks. And what we know is these recreational drones are not to fly over people or over vehicles. And so we have no way of controlling that. And so that's why we can only control the takeoff and the landing, and that's all we have signed. I don't believe, again, we've had any issues with drones. But Chief, have you had any calls out for people about drones in our parks?
Not that I'm aware of, and Sergeant Elias is on as well. I don't know if she, and you know, prior to me starting as the chief here, she was here for 2 years, so I don't know if you are aware of anything significant or consistent. She's talking, but she's still muted.
She's unmuted, but we can't hear her for some reason. But I think
it doesn't sound like it's much of an issue.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good. And then Councilmember Odell brought up the pigs, and the irony is I've actually seen pigs in some of our parks. So ironically, they were at Big Rock Park, and I wanted to change the name to Big Rock Pork because I saw them sitting there. There were about 5 of them all together. But I'm curious if, I'm not aware of what damage they may or may not do, but maybe we could, if that is a potential problem where they do damage to parks, or I've actually seen a miniature horse at Bill Reams Park. If animals of that nature, aside from dogs and, you know, maybe somebody wants to walk their cat to the park, if there are other animals and they do damage, I'm wondering if maybe parks like Big Rock might not be appropriate for that, just because that's a passive use park. We're not talking about ball fields. You know, there's a path. That's just an idea as to not, you know, if people actually want to come walk their pig at Big Rock Park, that they can still do that.
So are you suggesting? Sorry, go ahead, Grayson. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and I just wanted to point out there's within the proposed regulation, there is one of the rules would be pets allowed in park facilities. It would be dogs, pets, or domestic animals not permitted on any designated swimming beach, athletic field, picnic shelter area, or play area in the city of Sammamish. And so it's a very general, unless if you want to start itemizing what considers a pet, it's pretty broad. And so those are where those rules start to kick in, is under the section, Chapter 7A15, Pets and Animals.
Okay, so it sounds like the damage that could potentially occur from someone bringing their pig or their horse to the park is not going to be on an athletic field where the damage would be of concern to us. Is that a fair assessment of the way it's written?
Yes.
Okay, all right, very good. Okay,
but yeah, what I wanted to clarify is that were you suggesting that we decide which parks we would allow them or not, because it isn't written that way?
I think his clarification specifies where they are and are not allowed, and so I guess if they can, you know, do damage, I don't know what a pig would do. I don't own a pig. I have no idea. You know, do they dig? I don't know. Dogs dig. So I think it sounds like it's written fine where we're not concerned about damage, because we're not allowing them in certain places where we'd be concerned about damage, like them, you know, putting hoof marks all over the baseball diamond or something like that. So it sounds like it was well thought out already, but again, I'm not an expert in pigs and I don't know what they do. So to Odell's point, if there's some damage they could do outside of baseball fields and swimming beaches, then it might be something to pursue. But otherwise, I think it's probably okay.
Actually, Christy, if I could jump in for a minute, pigs can root up grass fields quite readily. And a lot of farm fields in the south have been totally decimated by wild pigs.
And just to point out, so there's also, in addition, there's a specific section just to answer Deputy Mayor's question. There is literally a section that states damage and disturbance by dogs, pets, or domestic animals, and clarifies what those rules and those penalties would be.
Thank you.
Okay, then I had just two questions, and they're like real close to the dogs, pets, pigs, whatever. And that was the horseback riding on all. Is there horseback riding allowed on all trails? And I remember back, this is probably in 2003 to 2005, where we would have issues, and probably don't have that issue so much anymore because we don't have so many equestrian subdivisions, where we would have issues with the horses and the people on the same trails. But so are we saying that all trails are open for equestrians?
The way that's written out here would be horses being permitted on city trails unless otherwise posted and designated. So unless if there's an explicit exclusion saying horses are not allowed on this trail, then the horses would be allowed. However, then they would be permitted in other cities to manage areas that are specifically posted. So for trails, it would be an automatic assumption unless if there's an explicit exclusion.
Okay, so I would have just a couple of comments on that because sometimes that didn't work out very well. So I would want to put a little bit more thought into that. And then with that comes the making sure with the allowing of horses to be on all trails comes the who's going to pick up the, and I didn't see that in here where you see it specifically for dogs, is who's going to pick up the horse poop, because I remember that being a very big problem. And so again, we don't have nearly as many horses as we used to, but I'm just saying what I remember being a problem. And I didn't see that addressed in here. And then going to, because I fish a lot, going to fishing rules. I saw in here where you have fishing pots, but I'm just trying to get a read here when you say no person may secure, and you're talking about a fishing pot used for harvest. I don't understand what that means because as harvest, are you talking about a holding pot or a holding net, or are you talking about a trolling type of net, or that you would use for fishing? Or so I need a better explanation, because if you use a dictionary explanation, that would give you something different than I think what you're meaning in this sentence.
Yeah, and that's something that we can include in our definition section to be able to address. And to answer a question regarding pet waste, we do have a section on pet waste. It states all animals or pets. So as that would apply to horses, then you would have to assume then the horseback rider would be responsible for that.
Okay. Okay. And I'm going to go around to make sure we've answered everybody on first round. So, Councilmember Treen, do you have any questions?
Not at this time.
Councilmember Ross?
I do not.
Councilmember Gamblin?
No, thank you.
Okay, then I'm going to go back up to the top. Councilmember Odell?
Not a question so much as a comment on the issue of holding tanks or cages, whatever, for fish. We want to be careful we don't create problems for people like the Kokanee Work Group or Trout Unlimited or state fish and wildlife researchers. Also for fishermen who may have a bucket full of water that uses a live well while they're fishing. That's my comment on that. Thank you.
Okay, then I'm going to go through here. Councilmember Stewart, do you have any other questions?
No, just thank you for a great presentation.
Okay. Deputy Mayor? Okay. I'm not hearing
Nope,
you.
doesn't on my end.
Okay. And I don't have anybody else have any other questions? All right. Excellent presentation. Very
Thank you.
good job.
Thank you, Council.
Okay, so next part of our agenda is for public comment.
Madam Mayor, we currently do not have anybody on the line for
Okay.
public comment.
So then we will go right on to council reports. We have that Deputy Mayor submitted a written report. Do you have anything that you needed to add to that you needed to state over your written report, Deputy Mayor?
Nope, there's no pick this month, just as an FYI. So.
Okay. And then the last thing that we have is we have a executive session, and it is pursuant to litigation RCW 423110L-I and or 423110G. And 423110-1I. And we will have to extend.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Councilmember Stewart.
I'm sorry, I had a council report. I just wanted to remind folks that it is Affordable Housing Week. And I will provide written details, but Friday there was a very interesting presentation. I believe Councilmember Odell was there for part of it. And then I did a build with Habitat for Humanity over the weekend down in Renton. And then on Monday, there was another presentation from the Affordable Housing Consortium. There are many organizations that are working together across the region, and I would like to see us participate more in those in terms of actively participate to see how we can get more involved. And there are a lot of interesting partnerships and creative solutions being developed, and I feel like we really need to really be part of that. So I'd like to throw that in there. I would also like to state
stuff this week as well.
Yeah, I would also like to state that if the council is going into executive session, that according to the Attorney General, that the council body, the governing body, has no authority to exclude me from these executive sessions, that the only remedy would be the judicial remedy according to RCW 42.30.130. But you do not have the authority to exclude me from an executive session without a court order. So I would like to formally request that you allow me into the executive session, given that you do not have the authority to exclude me.
Okay, I'm going to.
And I have provided this information.
Okay, I'm going to have our attorney, Lisa, would you please respond to that?
I'm familiar with that executive. Can you hear me? I've not used this mic for over a year. I've responded to that question to all of the council members. I did provide a legal opinion about that. I have nothing more to say on the matter.
All you said was that the Attorney General's word is not final, but you have not proven that the governing body has the legal authority to exclude me from an executive
with all due
session.
respect, I don't think that anything that I would tell you would be proof in your mind. The information that I addressed in my email to you is sufficient, in my opinion. I don't have anything further to say.
But you didn't, in your opinion, provide any legal grounds. You provided no RCW or nothing that states you have the authority.
Anyway, this is the last one. You are joining us back in this is your last one.
You're covering at least 3 topics in this executive session. The Attorney General clearly calls out that excluding me from this interferes with my ability as an elected representative from the voters to do my job.
Point of order, please.
Make your point.
We've already discussed this. We've already voted on this. Councilmember Stewart has made her opinion abundantly clear. Let's move on, please.
Okay, I need a motion to extend.
Motion to extend till 10:30.
Okay, motion and a second to extend to 10:30. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, so we are extended until 10:30, and we are going into executive session.
Madam Mayor, will there be any action after the executive
No,
session?
we are not anticipating.
Will there be any topics? Will there be any topics covered after the executive session, or may I be excused at this point?
Yeah, I do not believe we have anything. No. And we won't be concluding anything vital there either, so. Okay, today is Tuesday, May 11th, and the council is currently in executive session. We will be extending from 10:30 to 11 p.m. Again, still in executive session, extending till 11 p.m. Thank you. Today, May 11th, 2021, extending the meeting till 11 p.m.
Good night, Lisa. Thank you.
Thanks for staying late.
Bye, Lita. Thank you.
Oh.
I kind of like this location better. Is the lighting better? Yeah, I like the darker backdrop.
What?
It shines less on our big, bald heads.
That's what I was going to say. Talk out loud.
So I noticed.
company. I'm going to spend a year here, with just, there's 3 of us, sometimes 4, sometimes. Very lonely.
Okay.
But we were here the whole time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's busy. Weekend is best. I'm really fairly busy at work. It's a good thing, but.
Yeah, it is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so, yeah, so let's touch base like on Thursday or Friday. We'll set a time when I have my calendar in front of me. Yeah, perfect.
Dave's review thing? Oh, no. You guys will be great.
Good job tonight, Chris.
Good job, mister.
Yeah. Tom, good job tonight.
Yeah, I was proud of council again.
Yep.